listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to episode 101 of the mother of all talk shows. Last week's episode, 100, has been viewed by 1,004,000 people. That's just viewed. Never mind all the people all over the world that listened on FM, on AM, or online on SputnikNews.com. This truly is the global university of the airways. It's the biggest show of its kind anywhere in the world. And if you knew the budget we do it on, you'd laugh, though sometimes I cry. It's not going to be any different this week. It's going to be rock and roll radio with pictures. All the issues from last week are still exploding, reverberating, and new issues have come up like a volcano, erupting like the BBC, Prince Harry, and Princess Diana. But there are many other issues too, all over the world, and we'll be covering them here on the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London. But as I already said, you can watch and listen to us all over the world. If you're in Washington, D.C., you weren't even counted last week. It's 105.5 on FM. If you're anywhere else in the United States, coast to coast, you can listen to us on AM. And if you're anywhere else in the world, as obviously the vast majority of you are, then you can listen online on SputnikNews.com. Remember Big Algorithm? Maybe he had a night off last week. Maybe that's why we reached the million audience again. But you can never be sure when he's back on duty. So if you're watching on my Facebook page or on RT's Facebook pages, please share right now with all of your contacts, all of your friends. You can watch also on Twitter, on Twitch, on Telegram. I've lost track, actually, of all the places that you can watch us. On Instagram, right now, I'm waving. My wife is operating the camera. And an amazing number of people are watching on their phones on Twitter. But however you're consuming this show, you're doing so because you're going to get an alternative take to that which is served up to you. In the case of British viewers, on pain of imprisonment by the BBC. Now, I have been in a state of war with the BBC for some years now. That's probably why you've never seen me on it for some years now. No matter how germane the issue would be to having me on. Incidentally, in parenthesis, my old adversary, Jeremy Paxman, has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I'm very sorry to hear that. I respected him and always looked forward to our verbal jousts, and I wish him the best that is possible when stricken with that terrible disease. But the BBC has much more fundamental problems than that. It stands today on the brink of abolition. The Home Secretary, the Interior Secretary, whose purview includes broadcasting and therefore the BBC, has made it clear that the entire future of the BBC is now on the table. And I've been campaigning for that for some years. Usually when I'm campaigning for something, it does come to pass, though not always in the way that I would want it to. And that may be true also of the BBC. But the one thing all of us can agree on the vast majority of us, is that the current BBC is not fit for purpose. First of all, it's far too large. Its budget far too great. It crowds out other media, other independent production. It has monopoly status when it's funded, as I said, on pain of imprisonment by a compulsory poll tax. And that's simply unacceptable in 2021, when you can subscribe through apps and all the rest of it to everything else that you consume. Why should I only watch Match of the Day and This Is My House on BBC? And why should you pay for that? Why should an old age pensioner in Birstall, in West Yorkshire, pay for me to watch Match of the Day? That's absurd. If I want to watch Match of the Day, all I've got to do is subscribe to it. And I don't watch anything else. Some of you watch nothing except the BBC. Others of you, and it's an ever-increasing number, are not watching the BBC at all. Why? How, in 2021, should we be forced to pay for it? But that was before this week. Before the lava began to pour from the volcano that has now erupted over a significant, historically significant act of forgery, which changed the course of British history and cost a young woman, a much beloved young woman, Princess Diana, Princess of Wales, the mother to the heir to the throne, the mother to those two sons, one of them now so troubled, is dead because of the BBC. That's what Andrew Neil, the former politics guru on the BBC, has concluded, and I see no reason to doubt him. The BBC is now dripping in blood, royal blood, because of the historic act of forgery by one of their most senior employees, their religious affairs editor. Imagine. The religious affairs editor of the BBC was a forger who should be tonight behind bars. He forged documents and bank statements to trick Princess Diana into giving him an interview on Panorama. But they want it all to be on his head. That's why I'm not even mentioning his name. Because just like in the Watergate, it's not the original crime that is the biggest issue, it's the cover-up. And the people who covered up the religious affairs editor's forgery, criminal act, are sitting in the House of Lords. They're sitting still in senior positions in the BBC, being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds that you, if you're in Britain, are forced to pay for. Now, I've known the BBC to be liars practically all of my life, but this proves it. And they will not get off this hook. Not if I can help it, and not if the government has any sense, if they can help it. It's time to break up the BBC. It's time to jail the forgerers. It's time to sack the time servers who continue to pick up their bloated salaries at your expense. It's time for the lie machine that is the BBC, taxpayer-funded lie machine that is the BBC, to be broken up. Its purview to be radically cut back. There's no case for This Is My House being funded by the BBC. It's trivia. If you want to watch it, as me and my wife do, then you pay for it yourself. There is no case for a local BBC radio station from Land's End to John O'Groats. That's a matter for the private sector. There is no case for a taxpayer mandatorily funded festival of smut, festival of trivia, festival of come dance with me, of Norton, of all these sniggering, smutty television slatterns that you are forced to pay for. They should all be on independent television. I'm sure they'll do very well. Mr. Norton will continue to earn his millions, but it will only be paid by people who want to watch it. Not by my mother, who was sitting next to me in the sofa, although I wished the ground was swallowing me up, given the things that he was sniggering about. You feel me? The BBC is no longer fit for purpose, and it's time to go. And we'll be talking to the Right Honourable Norman Baker, Privy Councillor, former government minister, former member of Parliament, colleague of mine. We'll be talking to him about the royal aspects of this story, because he is, of course, a royal biographer, amongst many other things. Last week's show took place when the blood was running through the streets of Gaza. The airplanes were firing their missiles, their rockets, dropping their bunker-busting bombs, bringing down tower blocks, hitting schools, killing women, killing children in Gaza. Tonight they're not. But that doesn't mean the killing has stopped. The people in Gaza are still being killed, but they're being killed quietly again by hunger, by malnutrition, by dirty water, by no electricity supply that can be relied upon. Now thousands of them by homelessness, sleeping under the sky, because their homes are amongst the thousands that have been leveled. This compounding all of the houses that were leveled before, all of the killings that there were before. And of course, no sooner had the ceasefire been agreed, the security forces of the State of Israel were on the Temple Mount, around Al-Aqsa, firing guns again in the third holiest of places for the 2 billion Muslims around the world. What could possibly go wrong? It was the attack on the Al-Aqsa which caused this latest war on Gaza to erupt in the first place. But here's the thing. Israel lost this war. They killed hundreds of people, half of them women and children. They destroyed all these houses and other public buildings, but they lost the war. Their defenses could not cope with the fireworks being fired from ragged-assed people in sandals inside the barbed wire of Gaza, and serious military figures, one of whom I'm going to be talking with in a minute, are now questioning what would have happened if Hezbollah had been firing rockets from Lebanon, if the Iraqi resistance had been firing from Baghdad, if Iran had been firing from Iran. The military balance of power has decisively shifted as a result of this most futile of Israel's border wars. But a bigger issue arises. Israel lost the publicity war. A larger number of people in a larger number of countries found themselves, sometimes for the first time, deploring what Netanyahu was doing, cursing what Netanyahu was doing, and understanding, perhaps for the first time, why Netanyahu was doing it. So I've cut short my remarks tonight because there are all kinds of new features in this, the mother of all talk shows. I hope you enjoy them, and maybe I'll get a chance to speak again in the course of the show. But now it's Galloway's general knowledge. I have to do this before every break. The people upstairs told me it's Galloway's general knowledge, and the first question is, which Jack Nicholson film came out on this day in 1980? A, Chinatown, B, The Shining, C, Prizzi's Honor. A better question would have been, which of my speeches does Jack Nicholson have framed in his downstairs lavatory? That would have been a better Jack Nicholson question. Which Nicholson film came out this day in 1980? Chinatown, The Shining, or Prizzi's Honor? I'll be right back.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off, get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. 02077 982 255 is the number if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480, or tweet me, of course.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Here's Georgie. Yes, of course it was The Shining. I have not been able to persuade Mrs. Galloway to watch it yet. She thinks it's too frightening. And my acting out of Jack Nicholson's wonderful scene when he smashes through the bathroom has frightened her so much she will not watch it. But this is only for fun, by the way. You don't need to ring in, or there are no prizes. Just approbation. Now, here's the first poll. Did the media kill Diana and drive Harry mad? A, yes. B, no. C, don't care. Get voting now on my Twitter feed. Now, Miko Peled's father was an Israeli general. Miko Peled was an Israeli soldier. Miko Peled is an author and a filmmaker, an American and an Israeli citizen. And I'm glad to say he joins us now on the mother of all talk shows. Miko, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with the military aspects, if we may. I don't know if you heard my earlier remarks, but I'm reading now in the Israeli press that actually, militarily, this was something of a disaster for Netanyahu. They didn't achieve any of their objectives. a number of chinks in their own armour were revealed. And that's before we talk about the public relations issue, which I promise we'll turn to next. But tell me if you agree with me on that purely military level so far. Unfortunately, he's frozen. We'll get him back, I hope. Let me give you some social media. Junaid says, I believe it was the royal family who got Diana killed with the help of the Secret Service agencies. Ricky says, the media helped add to the mounting pressure she probably already faced with the royal family. I believe the stress, topped by what other problems were going on, didn't help Harry at all. And Gary says, prosaically, no, a drunk driver killed her. R.I.P. to her, of course, he adds. And Kyle says, the establishment killed Diana and drove Harry mad. The media just happened to be there the whole time. Harry's apparently happier now and still gets media attention on request. So has absolutely nothing to do with the media. The control of the establishment is what's to blame. Controversial, that one, Carl. And Gary says, if she had royal security with her, she wouldn't have been able to drive off in France, and hence might still be alive. Bashir should be charged with manslaughter. End of. And Mike says, simplistic, but if 1% of the blame could be put on the Bashir interview, 99% of the blame should be on newspaper intrusion and trolling. And Binney says, unfortunately, Diana was not wearing a seatbelt and was being driven by a drunk driver when the accident happened. And Marek says, much as I detest what the BBC did, Princess Diana's tragic death was an accident which no one could have foreseen. Harry isn't mad unless the man he's with, unless the woman he's with drives him insane. Nothing intended in that. Let me go to give you the phone numbers. I think they're on the screen, but I'll read them out anyway. They're entirely free, by the way. Toll free, they say, in the United States. Just free, we say here in the United Kingdom. So you can call us free in the UK on 448081 965 522. And if you're in the US, just put +1 844 944 3344. And you can, of course, tweet us at George Galloway and at RT UK News. So the UK number, just to repeat it, is 8. It's been written wrongly. That's why I'm being told in my ear. So I've got it written here as 8081. Is that not right? 08081 is how I'm supposed to say it, and 965 522. Okay? 08081 965 522. Get ringing, because you've got an unexpected window until we can get back to Miko Peled. Let's take a call, actually, on Gaza from Miles in London. Go ahead, Miles.
Oh, hey, George.
Hi.
Good riddance to the BBC. We won't miss them. George, why is it we were able to hold South Africa accountable, but not hold Israel accountable? And the Goldstone report, where did that get to?
Nowhere. Nowhere.
And would we go back to Goldstone a second time now? Or we need a new person?
These are $64,000 questions you're asking me, and that's when $64,000 was very much more money than it currently is. There are key differences. First of all, the Boers in South Africa did not have and did not deserve to have sympathy from people all over the world. because they had not suffered the Holocaust, which Jewish people did. And that's a major factor in this whole issue. Of course, the Balfour Declaration was made long before the Holocaust. The Sykes-Picot treachery was performed long before the Holocaust. The Zionist idea of establishing a state for Jews anywhere, actually, that time it was not envisaged that it would be in what was then called Palestine, and serious debate, negotiations, very serious, took place with the British Empire over establishing a country called Israel in Patagonia, in Argentina, in Uganda, in Africa, in the Seychelles, in Africa, and other places. So all of that happened long before the Holocaust, but the Holocaust is, if you like, the X factor, which transferred this issue onto an entirely different level. And the second reason is that Israel is far more strategically important to what I call the imperialist system than apartheid South Africa ever was. And therefore, the imperialist countries were not prepared to die on the hill to preserve apartheid in South Africa, but they are prepared to support Israel even in the teeth of all that has happened to the nth degree. But that is beginning to wane. That was the point I was trying to make earlier. I've been involved in this subject since 1975. So I know what I'm talking about. There has never been a war in which Israel was less popular than the one we've just lived through in the last week. There has never been a war in which the Palestinians were more popular than the one that we lived through over this last week or so. So times are changing, Miles. Now, have we got Miko? We're just going to get him on the phone. What a pity, because the video line has frozen. Miko, are you there? On line 2. Miko Peled, author, activist, and of course, former soldier. Thanks for joining us, albeit on audio only. I'm sorry about that. I was saying earlier, Miko, that from a purely military standpoint, never mind others, which we'll come to, this latest Netanyahu war was a bit of a disaster, really. We still have not got Miko. At least I don't. Miko, are you there?
Yeah, you got. Yeah, I'm ready to hear.
Okay,
Hello?
Go on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was a disaster from every possible perspective. I mean, the airport, they managed to stop flights from coming into Tel Aviv airport for about a week. I mean, that's, and the rockets were falling and scaring everybody. And considering this is a country that's got one of the largest and most sophisticated armies in the world, and Hamas has never, I mean, the Palestinians never had so much as a tank, and then yes, of course, this is a disaster. And of course, it ended with, I think, the total humiliation of Netanyahu and his military. And they didn't even dare to bring in ground forces because they knew that if they brought in ground forces, they would be killed, and they cannot face the Palestinian fighters face to face. So
that's right. Tel Aviv was hit for the first time. The airport was affected. The Iron Dome worked most of the time, but not all of the time. And this is from the rudimentary munitions, homemade munitions of Hamas and other groups inside Gaza, which Israel completely controls. Every entry, every exit, the sky, the sea. If other foes had joined in, that's what I've read some I read a lot of Israeli news, and the military retired military are openly discussing, well, what would have happened if the Lebanese had joined in, if the Iraqis had joined in. This would have been a potential military disaster for us.
Yes, of course. I mean, the Israelis, the greatest fears they would have to confront Hezbollah, for example, face to face, or God forbid any other military, because the Israeli military is fully equipped to destroy a whole country from the air, but they are incapable of fighting a war. All they know to do is to bomb people who have no defenses and to shoot people who don't have a military force. The Israeli military was to face a well-disciplined, well-trained army that would be destroyed. I don't think there's any question about that.
Now, on a political level, there is no argument at all. Both of us have been through many such conflagrations. There's never been a time where Israel was less popular at war than it was last week. There's never been a time where more people were speaking up for the Palestinians than were speaking up last week. Even the FA Cup final was interrupted by two of the winning players holding up their Palestinian flag in front of the FA Cup, in front of 1 billion television viewers, and so on. In propaganda terms, it was a big loss for Israel, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and not to mention the fact that this went all the way up to the U.S. Congress and Senate, where they're debating halting the military aid of some $730 million that the Biden administration wants to give Israel. So this has been a colossal defeat politically as well. In terms of public relations, the Israeli speakers, the ambassadors, all of the spokespeople seem like fools. And like you said, thousands upon thousands of people marching in every capital around the world, in every city across the world, protesting and demanding an end to the massacre and then standing with Palestinians. This is absolutely unprecedented, yeah.
Now, last week I interviewed your compatriot and fellow journalist, man of the pen, Gideon Levy, and he chided me for placing all of this on Netanyahu, because he pointed out there have been many before Netanyahu and there will be many after Netanyahu, and that is, of course, correct. But it's also true that it was nakedly obvious that Netanyahu needed this in order to stay out of jail, in order to stay in the Prime Minister's office. So now that it's failed, what happens next, Miko?
Well, it failed only if you have a real objective outlook. In terms of the Israeli public loves what happened. They don't view this as a defeat at all. The talking heads on all the TV shows, on all the news channels here, and I'm in Jerusalem right now. You listen to channel after channel, panel after panel, newscast after newscast. It was a massive victory. It was a colossal defeat for Hamas. Netanyahu could not be more popular. His government and his actions on the ground in Gaza could not be more popular. So actually over here, I think it did help him. I think it strengthened him. It showed him to be a strong leader. He walks around with a retinue of generals, of course, and the defense minister, who has now become his BFF, his best friend for life after they were political rivals. And he did manage to, light the match this time. Of course, there were others who lit matches before, because this is a barrel of explosive here. All you have to do is light a match. So he lit the match, and it seems like over here it helped him politically, because it showed that he knows how to handle Hamas and how to deal with the Arabs and so forth. All these things that the Israeli public enjoy so much, and there's not a single word of dissent in the press. I mean, you hear, especially at least on the television, there's no dissent. From time to time, he's criticized for not killing enough, for not bombing enough. for not bringing back more heads of Palestinians and so forth, of Hamas leaders. By and large, it seems that this worked for him very, very well, and it did seal his backside to the prime minister seat for at least the foreseeable future.
Do you think he has to go for an election, or his minority government will cling on?
I think he may have a majority. It depends on what kind of rabbit he has, what kind of magic he can pull. He doesn't care. I mean, he's happy to go to elections because all of these repeated elections have helped him maintain his seat and remain prime minister all of these years, the last 2-3 years. So he's quite happy. I think all he cares about is remaining as prime minister, whether it means spending billions of more dollars on more elections or whether it means compromising and making deals with coalition partners. As long as he remains in his seat and he does not have to give it up even for a minute, he's happy. But I find it hard to believe that they would not agree that he could not put together a real right-wing coalition right now. I think that they're beginning to be afraid of another round of elections. And there are plenty of people who agree with him and with whom he agrees, and they could all happily sit together in coalition. Really, if ideologically the differences are really non-existent.
And what about the criminal prosecution?
Yeah, it's going on, but you rarely hear anything about it. It's rarely brought up in the news here. It's rarely mentioned. From time to time, it's mentioned that, yes, there are a few parliamentarians who want to pass a law that would make it impossible for someone who's been indicted to run for prime minister or to sit as a prime minister. But those voices are being overshadowed by other voices. So it comes up very, very little. It's not a main news item at all.
Miko Peled from Jerusalem, a bad line, but great words. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's go to Michigan and talk with Ehab on the same subject, Gaza. Go ahead, Ehab.
Yeah, hi, George. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Go ahead.
So this is what's happening right now, the way I see it. The people of our planet get acquainted once again with the unjust plight of the Palestinians. The occupiers of Palestine commit another Nakba, and the world is noticing this injustice. First of all, this is one important thing we have to always note. Israel's borders are not set. There are no recognizable international borders for Israel except when it decides that those borders exist. So this tells you what kind of entity we're dealing with. All its efforts are continuously about expansion at the cost of the Palestinians, at the cost of our other Arabs. I myself, I'm from Lebanon, but my family has land in northern, what's called Israel, in northern occupied Palestine that we have deeds for. We still hold those deeds. So it's not just a matter of Palestinians. It's all Arabs. And so what does this recent conflict mean? To me, the deal of the century that was so uplifting for people who never knew the truth is gone.
Well, you say that, Ehab, but all the countries that signed the Abraham Accord with President Trump stayed completely silent. In one case, literally, completely, utterly silent. No word of what was happening in Gaza was allowed to be reported or broadcast in their country. Countries as disparate as the United Arab Emirates and Morocco have joined the other side. So you say that these accords failed, but they didn't really fail, did they?
Well, if you look at it the way in terms of leaderships, yeah, they're all running, and this is part of it.
Yeah, well, how else can I look at it? I can only look at the government and the armed forces of Morocco, of the UAE, of Kuwait, and so on. And I can only look at the propaganda apparatus in these states and add Saudi Arabia, which hasn't yet joined the Abraham Accords, but more or less is in the same camp. There's not much of an Arab factor left in this discussion, is there, Ahab?
Well, from an official standpoint, that's correct. But let me say this. The Arab masses seethe with anger and the corruption and ineptitude of their leadership.
Well, you can assert that, but have you got any evidence?
Again, what happened in Palestine is one example. Sooner or later, the masses of the Arabs will realize that, look, these are our Palestinian brothers who, without anything, they were able to do this. So what about us that live under pretty much these dictators? What can we do?
Okay, it's a point of view, Ahab. I once shared it, but I've got to tell you, it all sounds quite hollow to me now. The big demonstrations for Palestine were everywhere except the Arab world. They were in Michigan. I saw you when Joe Biden had the misfortune to be scheduled to appear at the Ford Motor Plant in Michigan, whilst the homeland of hundreds of thousands of people who live in Dearborn, in Michigan, were being destroyed. And I saw your demonstrations. The American uprising against what was happening was immense. So it was everywhere in the world, except in the Arab world. Ahab?
Yes. Yeah, it's true. But let's look at it, man. The normalization and these Abraham Accords are a farce.
Well, they're working. That's my point. You say they're a farce, but they're working. They have taken all these Arab countries out of the Arab world and put them somewhere else.
It's true, but the Arabs are still Arabs. And the people, the regular people, they will still identify with their brothers. I mean, let's look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is actually on a hot plate right now.
And your evidence for that is what?
I'm sorry, I'm kind of missing you because sometimes I'm not getting the reception.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much for joining us from Michigan. Now, it's Galloway's General Knowledge again. And my second question is, who won the first Eurovision Song Contest in 1956? Was it A, Holland, B, France, or C, Switzerland? Now, I ask this question in the full knowledge that Britain again came last in the Eurovision Song Contest with 0 points, 0, duck's egg. How could that be? Was our song that bad? Last year and this year? Last with 0 points? Is there any politics in this Eurovision Song Contest? Well, there must be, because Israel are in it and they have got nothing whatsoever to do with Eurovision. But they do have a sense of humour. The Israeli entry in last night's Eurovision Song Contest was called Set Me Free. You couldn't make it up. But who won the first one in 1956? Holland, France, or Switzerland? Tell me.
Radio Sputnik.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So who won the first Eurovision Song Contest in 1956? Was it Holland, France, or Switzerland? Of course, it was a Swiss roll. Now, Ghadi Francis is a journalist and war correspondent, and a very brave one, and a very eminent one. She is currently based in Beirut, but in 2013, she went to Gaza and made 2 documentaries, brilliant, powerful documentaries about the conflict in the Arabic language. She stayed 6 days in tunnels in Gaza, went to Gaza through Egypt. She also wrote a book, again in Arabic, on Syria called My Pen and Pain, 100 Days in Syria. It's by Saki Books, 2012, and it's datelined Beirut. Ghadi joins us now, I hope, journalist and war correspondent from Beirut. I hope the line is better than it was in Jerusalem. Ghadi, can you hear me well?
I can hear you quite clearly. I'd just like to correct one thing that has been said. I didn't spend the 6 days in the tunnels. I actually passed through the tunnels. I spent the 6 days in besieged Gaza, in Jabalia.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because 6 days in the tunnels would have been most uncomfortable, but 6 days in Jabalia would not be that much better.
Jabalia and all other different parts of Gaza spent with journalists and people trying to really understand, because I come from a generation that was brought up, I'm 32 years old now. I remember it was like my 2nd or 3rd year in college, when on New Year's Eve we were in front of the Esqua protesting for children of Gaza. We weren't partying, and I would never forget that, because I had to give up my New Year's Eve celebrations, because in my conscience, like, there are children being slaughtered in 2008, that is. So for us, for this same person to go 5 years later and actually reach Gaza, it was something on so many levels. Like, I'm actually in Palestine. It's the first time I see the Palestinian flag inside Palestine without having to deal with the occupiers. I was really disappointed, because, you know, we have all these romantic ideas, and then you get to understand the reality more. But I discovered many things. It was the time of truce when I actually went to Gaza, and I was angry because I did not hear any clashes. And I told my friends, I want to go to Beit Lahia. I want to go to the places where there is a border, where I can see an Israeli. And then there were like strawberry farmers, 2 boys, and they're telling me their daily clashes when they're in their land, how they come and the Israeli occupiers from the other side start scuffles with them, and how this was their daily life. But I couldn't really, there was nothing there, and there was actually a police guarding the truce. And this really led to a great disappointment for me. Because, you know, like, I don't drink Starbucks. I don't go to H&M. I don't do any of these things, because I'm a pro-Palestine person. So when I go there and you meet with, like, there's nothing happening right now. But what happened this past week taught me the biggest lesson of my life, is that we cannot anticipate what the resistance is doing. We cannot really anticipate what is the best for what. While I was really being a kid about it and saying, why isn't there any war? Why are you eating Israeli cheese? Why do you have Israeli lines? Why do you use the shekel? Just like a kid. While actually they were inventing and procuring a strength that could do all the things, all the change that Gaza did last week. I know you're going to tell me a lot of people died. This is our pain. But whatever the status quo is, they are always killing us. They're always killing us. You don't hear about it, but every day a child dies. A woman is shot at a checkpoint. in Lebanon, inside Palestine, inside the occupied lands, and in Gaza. Every day we're dying, every day. This has been the story of our lives for 72 years. So, but now the new narrative is that they cannot withstand the fear of what we could do if we are all fighting together. If they, I really read the Israeli press and the narratives that they're saying, and they say, what if Hezbollah did the same? What if Syria enters? What if the Jordanians at the borders do that? What if it's all together? And actually, what happened during the past week tells me that there is hope, that one way or another we're going to get there.
Well, the political, military, and public relations victory, without doubt, belongs to the Arab side. The Israelis can pretend otherwise, as Miko Peled just told us. From Jerusalem, they are pretending otherwise, but in their heads and their hearts, they know that they had less support at the end of the week than they had at the beginning of it, that the Iron Dome did not work, and to the extent that Tel Aviv was able to be hit, the airport was able to be hit, and the soldiers were not able to enter Gaza for fear of a face-to-face fight on the ground with the Palestinians. All these things cannot be denied. Neither can it be denied that if other parties had joined in, you mentioned Lebanon and Syria, but also Iraq, which I think may have been a most decisive possibility, that the resistance movements in Iraq were threatening to begin firing missiles which they claimed could easily reach Israel. These are all big changes from what existed just a week ago. But according to Miko Peled, Netanyahu is much more popular this weekend than he was before all this began. He will be able to stay in power. He may not even have to go for another election. He will not be sent to jail on the corruption indictments. So the scene is set for another war, and possibly soon, isn't it?
You know, I don't like to speculate about the things that I really don't know about. I don't know if there's going to be another war, but I can tell you about Netanyahu, why this is happening, why he's not going to have another election. My analysis of that is that because they are now asking, the Israelis are asking themselves bigger existential questions. They don't have the luxury to do that anymore, from my point of view. When you are actually a settler, it's not your land, and you spend the last week in underground and afraid, and your whole existence is under question. Your airports are closed, your airports, they're not their airports, they are occupied Palestine airports. But everything, your whole existence is under question. So as a bunch of settlers, their priorities now are not the same. But it's not because Netanyahu is popular, it's because he might be the last PM. I cannot really understand how they think and their internal politics, but I don't think it has made him more popular. I think it has made it more clear that they don't have the choice to do internal politics for fifth election or to form a different. It's typical biology. I mean, when you are in a house and the house is on fire and you don't know if it's gonna stay, you don't really do the refurnishing, you know? You just try to put out the fire. So now the whole existence is under question.
Let me ask you about another existential question. And I speak as someone who was living in your city before you were born. Do the Arabs...
We all know this, and we love you for that, actually. You have a very big fan base in Lebanon, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you so much. Do the Arabs still exist?
I've never identified myself as an Arab. I believe I have a different thought, so I cannot really relate to the idea. We have always had this ideology of believing in Mesopotamia and the Levantine. I don't think that Syria, and you mentioned Iraq, I don't think that Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, this part has the same history or geopolitical nature like the Arab Gulf or the North Africa region. Because when you say Arab, it's from Mauritania till Kuwait and UAE and all these 22 countries. I don't think it's fair to say that the whole thing. But what Palestine has proven last week is that yes, there are Arabs. There is a sentiment, a general Arab sentiment and Islamic sentiment, but above all, a global humanitarian sentiment. We saw yesterday in London. The world showed Palestine a shape of solidarity that really, for me, I think it's higher, because it's like for the first time we see a Congresswoman speaking about this, and an American president talking about it, and all this shape of solidarity. But I don't speak as an Arab. I believe that I have a different identity as a Lebanese.
Yeah, I understand that. I suppose my point is this. When I lived in your city before you were born, all of the Arabs supported Palestine and nobody in the West did. I promise you that. I could show you my scars. Now it seems to have reversed, that all over the Western countries, there are millions of people on the march for Palestine, but the Arab world is quiet. Obviously, Lebanon is an example, is an exception beyond description.
Also Syria and Iraq.
Syria and Iraq also. Yemen also.
And Yemen, exactly.
But in the other Arab countries, particularly those that have recently signed up to these Abraham Accords. Morocco used to be one of the biggest armies for Palestine amongst the public. How has that changed?
Well, I think there has been a question, and I take the UAE, for example, like they said, no, don't enter the Aqsa, but okay, let's push for ceasefire. I think these countries are still at the very beginning of that normalization deal. And even the American president who set the Abraham Accords is not there now. And I think it's not, these deals also were affected, the nature of these deals were affected by the big Palestinian uprising. But because also, this is the answer, because there is this point of view towards the big historic struggle, because this is what their choice was, we cannot find it surprising that there wasn't any kind in the streets. Also, these countries, these Arab countries that you speak of, probably most of the Arab countries, they don't really have that shape of political activism. We never see political parties protesting or riots, or we've never seen it on any occasion. And even in the beginning of your question, even when you were living in my city long before I was born, when you say the Arabs were with Palestine, I don't think they were ever with Palestine, because if they really were with Palestine, the occupation would have ended a long time ago. They were
very good answer. Very, very good answer. And unfortunately, we're now out of time, but it's been a real pleasure talking with you. Thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. I hope you'll come back again. It would be wonderful to see you. Now, the poll is doing great business. 42% of you, 42% of you think that the media killed Diana and drove Harry mad. 30% of you say that you don't think that, but 27% of you actually don't care. Now, if you're in the UK, call me, 08081 965 522. If you're in the US, call me 1-844-944-3344. It's time for the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
At least 8 people have died after a cable car fell on a mountain near Lake Maggiore in northern Italy today. The accident happened on a service taking passengers from the resort towns of Stresa up the nearby Matori Peak in the Piedmont region. An image posted on social media by emergency services showed the wreckage of the car lying in a wooded area. Officials say 2 children were taken from the scene to a paediatric hospital in Turin by helicopter. The cause of the incident remains unclear, but local reports suggest the cable carrying it may have failed about 300 metres from the top of the mountain. The BBC's reputation has been, quote, highly damaged following an inquiry into the Panorama interview with Diana, Princess of Wales, Home Secretary Priti Patel has said. She commented that Lord Dyson's probe into how Martin Bashir obtained the interview 25 years ago was a really significant moment for the BBC. The independent inquiry found that Bashir used deception, including the forging of bank statements, to get it. Asked whether the corporation would survive, Patel said it would have to, quote, reflect and learn lessons. She added that it had been utterly heartbreaking to hear Diana's sons Prince William and Prince Harry speaking, quote, in very personal terms about their mother following the publication of the report last week. The report by former senior judge Lord Dyson found that Bashir was unreliable, dishonest, and that the BBC fell short of its high standards when answering questions about the interview. In response, Bashir said that he, quote, never wanted to harm, adding, I don't believe we did. In the 1995 World Exclusive interview, Princess Diana confirmed Prince Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles and described in frank detail how she believed royal life had made her bulimic. Patel has also denied claims the UK government pursued a herd immunity policy early in the pandemic. The Prime Minister's former aide, Dominic Cummings, has claimed the original plan was to let the virus spread through the population, thereby achieving so-called herd immunity. And had scientific advice been followed, there would have been no need for lockdowns. Cummings said Number 10 later realised herd immunity would be a catastrophe. But the UK Health Security Agency chief said allowing people to become infected, quote, has never been on the agenda. Dr. Jenny Harries said she has never been in a government meeting where herd immunity was put forward as a mechanism of control for the pandemic. She said she would not comment on what Cummings would say ahead of his appearance in front of a parliamentary committee on Wednesday, but added, our strategy was always about public health, saving lives and protecting the NHS. Cummings is also expected to claim before the committee that the Prime Minister missed 5 crucial COVID planning meetings because he was writing a biography of Shakespeare, which he needed to complete to pay for a divorce settlement with his former wife. The Pfizer and AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccines are highly effective against the variant identified in India after 2 doses, a study has found. 2 jabs of either vaccine gave a similar level of protection against symptomatic disease from the Indian variant as they do for the Kent one. However, both vaccines were only 33% effective against the Indian variant 3 weeks after the first dose. This is compared with 50% effectiveness against the Kent variant. Public Health England, which ran the study, said the vaccines are likely to be even more effective at preventing hospital admissions and deaths. 21 runners have died after extreme weather struck a long-distance race in northwestern China. High winds and freezing rain hit the participants in the 100 kilometres ultra-marathon in the Yellow River Stone Forest, a tourist site in Gansu province, on Saturday. The race was halted when some of the 172 runners went missing and a rescue operation was launched. Many of the stranded runners reportedly suffered from hypothermia. Officials said 151 runners were now confirmed safe and that 8 of them were injured. The lead singer of the Italian band, which won the Eurovision Song Contest, has denied taking drugs following online speculation over live competition footage showing him leaning over a table. Maneskin's Damiano David rejected the idea that he'd been taking cocaine. He claimed that he didn't do drugs at a press conference. In a statement, Eurovision said the singer would take a voluntary drug test after arriving home. Maneskin, who had been favourites to win the contest, took the top prize with their song Zitti e Buoni. Viewers speculated as to what the singer was doing when he appeared to bend his face towards a table as the band celebrated their victory during the live broadcast. An image that appears to show Dubai's missing Princess Latifah has been posted on a social media account. If legitimate, the post would be the first time Princess Latifah bin Mohammed Al Maktoum has been seen in public since she claimed in video messages that she was being held hostage by her father in the United Arab Emirates. Her father, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, has consistently denied these claims. The image, uploaded to Instagram 2 days ago, appears to have been taken recently in the Mall of the Emirates in Dubai. And finally, if you have ever wondered what it would be like to be a passenger on the Titanic, and why would you, a theme park in China is set to offer the closest experience you can get. A massive replica of the sunken ocean liner is now under construction in Daying County in Sichuan province. Called the Unsinkable Titanic, the ship is the exact same size as the original, 269.06 metres in length and 28.19 metres wide. The centrepiece of a theme park called Romandacy will have the same amenities as its namesake, including banquet halls, theatres, observation decks and a swimming pool. Guests will be able to pay to spend the night aboard the ship, which will be permanently docked in a reservoir in the Xizang River, about 130 kilometres from the provincial capital Chengdu, several hundred miles from the sea. And as far as we know, an iceberg is not being worked on and visitors won't need to wear life jackets. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You can call me absolutely free. Toll free, as they say in the United States. If you're in the UK, the number is 08081 965 522. And if you're in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344, and it won't cost you a penny. We're keen to get more calls in on the shows from here on in. Now, this next story belongs in the drawer marked unbelievable. In fact, if I didn't know it was true, the facts as presented to me would not have been believed by me. Stephen Dozinger is an American attorney known for his legal battles with the Chevron oil company. But he wasn't doing that for himself. He had 30,000 clients. But they were poor farmers and indigenous people in Ecuador, and therefore worth less in the eyes of some jurisdictions and most big multinational oil companies. The case related to environmental damage and health effects caused by oil drilling in Ecuador by Chevron. And the dispute centers on a decision in 2011 by the Ecuador courts, which ordered the company to pay $9.5 billion in damages to people blighted by decades of polluted air and water. Chevron just never paid up. They claimed that there was a shocking level of misconduct and fraud by the lawyer and by the Ecuadorian judges. Chevron, not content with not paying the fine, then took their lawyer to court in the United States. And when he refused to hand over his professional equipment, his laptop and all that, he was put under house arrest in the United States in 2019, and he has not left his apartment since. Now, this extraordinary story has begun to get huge traction in the United States. Susan Sarandon and other famous and progressive people have rallied to Stephen Donziger's cause. And I suppose you'd have to be of a certain cast of mind to believe that an American lawyer should be under house arrest in America because he represented 30,000 poor farmers and indigenous people in Ecuador and won. Does that sound like justice to you? Well, it doesn't to me, and that's why our next guest is Stephen Donziger, who joins me now after this short video. Stephen, we'll come and talk to you in a minute, but I think we should let the audience see this short video first, with your permission. Bear with me, please.
30 Nobel laureates have joined global human rights and environmental NGOs calling for an end to the home detention of human rights lawyer Stephen Donziger. Donziger played a key role in winning the landmark $9.5 billion judgment in Ecuador against Chevron for its deliberate pollution of the Amazon rainforest while operating as Texaco from 1964 to 1992. He has become Chevron's target in the company's stated campaign to, quote, demonize Donziger, unquote. In 2011, Chevron was found liable and ordered to pay $9.5 billion for deliberately polluting the Amazon by dumping 16 billion gallons of toxic waste into the rainforest, causing a massive health crisis. Instead of paying the judgment, Chevron withdrew its assets and fled the country. 916 toxic waste pits remain, poisoning the local drinking water to this day. Chevron should focus on a complete cleanup. Instead, with support from a U.S. federal judge, Chevron is attempting to silence Donziger and those who support him. Framed by Chevron with false evidence and testimony from a bribed witness, the judge has ordered Donziger to turn over his email passwords, phone, and computer to the court to give to Chevron. When Donziger appealed the order, the judge charged him with criminal contempt, seized his passport, and placed him in home detention. Donziger has been convicted of no crime, yet remains under house arrest for over 8 months, unable to pursue justice for the Ecuadorians poisoned by Chevron. Corporate power coupled with judicial abuse has run roughshod over the rights of a human rights lawyer pursuing justice in the largest case of oil-related environmental destruction in history. Chevron's attacks on Donziger must be stopped. The U.S. government must free Donziger today and investigate the ongoing violations and abuses by Chevron and its lawyers. Join Nobel laureates Greenpeace USA, Global Witness, Amazon Watch, Rainforest Action Network, and other activists call for the immediate release of human rights lawyer Stephen Donziger. Stand up to big oil.
Stephen, I'm almost lost for words, I've got to tell you. My wife interviewed you before for our Sputnik program, but that's the first time I've seen that video. My first question really has to be this. Why didn't Chevron quit while they were ahead? They got fined $9.6 billion and didn't pay it. You would have thought they would have wanted to leave it at that. Why have they come after the lawyer who represented their victims whom they have not compensated?
Well, good to be on your show, George. First, I want to mention that was a video presented at Chevron's shareholder meeting 1 year ago this next week. So I'm still in house arrest 1 year later. It was 8 months when that video was made by Alec Baldwin. It's now 20 months on a misdemeanor charge, which in the United States is a petty crime charge that has a maximum sentence if convicted of 6 months in prison. And I've already been 20 months in my home prison. To answer your question, they still face financial risk. They didn't pay the fine, but the reality is the affected communities in Ecuador have an international legal team, other than me, who are exploring ways to seize Chevron's assets, oil assets and refineries and the like, to force compliance with the rule of law and make them pay the judgment. Chevron has calculated that if it can attack me or use the U.S. judicial system in this very abusive way to lock me up, the chances, excuse me, of the judgment being enforced go down significantly. It's a calculation Chevron has made to risk, manipulating the system to get a financial return. In the meantime, I've been deprived of my liberty. A critical fact, George, is I'm not being prosecuted by the U.S. government. I'm being prosecuted by a private law firm that has Chevron as a client. The U.S. government rejected this case. They refused to prosecute me. So the judge, Judge Kaplan, who allowed the company to put in paid witness testimony and false evidence against me, is also the one locking me up. And he's doing it by a private law firm that he appointed to press these charges after they were rejected by the regular U.S. federal prosecutor.
Well, I knew that standards had slipped in the United States in recent years, but I hadn't realized they had slipped so far. So the U.S. government refused to prosecute you, but under a private prosecution, you can be imprisoned in your house for 20 months. And not presumably, therefore, able to earn your living.
Well, I haven't earned a living for 2 years. They're trying to get me to quit the case. They're trying to punish me and weaponize my situation to, I think, intimidate other human rights lawyers and environmental justice defenders. We're in a critical moment in the world now with the planet under threat. Global warming poses an existential threat to our children, our grandchildren, our world. And, if the frontline lawyers like me cannot continue to do this important work to hold these major polluters accountable, we're not going to be able to save the planet, and we're all going to be really screwed. And, what's happening here is Chevron doesn't like lawyers who do this work, especially those that, like myself, who are successful at it and who know what they're doing. So they're trying to use me and weaponize me to intimidate others so they don't get into this field and they don't do this work. And the fossil fuel industry will continue to make, its profits, even though it profits from activities that harm us all. So that's, to me, the big picture. I mean, these are extreme measures for extreme times. It's an outrage that the United States federal judiciary is letting this happen. This is a corporate prosecution. It is not a normal prosecution. No one in the United States ever has seen a corporate prosecution before this one, before the one Chevron is in control of and targeting me. So, there's been a lot of consolidation of corporate control in the United States and government and the, Congress and the executive branch. I'm shocked that they're now trying essentially to take control of part of the normally independent judicial branch. And they have obviously succeeded in my case, even though ultimately I expect to be able to get through this.
Well, yeah. What about the reputational damage, not just to Chevron, but to the whole idea of justice? You mentioned Alec Baldwin, Susan Sarandon, many important cultural figures have come to your side. What about political figures? Is anyone in Congress raising this apparent outrage?
Well, there have been 6 congresspersons who have written a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice asking for them to take the private corporation prosecution back, so they prosecute me directly. And if they were to do that, they'd probably dismiss the case because they declined to prosecute me to begin with. But we need more support. I mean, we need more public figures. We have 68 Nobel laureates who demanded my release, literally thousands of lawyers. But, you know, U.S. elected officials, we need more support. They need to really act to prevent this embarrassment. I mean, this isn't just harming me and harming the indigenous peoples of Ecuador who are literally dying at the hands of Chevron's pollution. I think it's an embarrassment for the United States government overall.
Yeah, I do.
A rights lawyer locked up in the United States. It's
exactly.
Crazy.
I think the same. There's something of the Julian Assange about this. As I'm talking to you, I'm feeling that a truth teller, a whistleblower, in your case, a lawyer. I mean, does legal privilege have no meaning anymore, where a man can be prosecuted for winning a legal case?
Well, look, you know, corporate litigants and well-heeled litigants respect each other's privileges. There's been when it comes to a human rights lawyer and you won a $10 billion judgment against a big American oil company, they're throwing rules out left and right to try to stop me from working. You know, for example, I'm the only person in America locked up on a misdemeanor charge, any charge. I mean, there's thousands of cases. Why am I the only one locked up? You know, no one else is locked up for even one day. The longest sentence ever given for someone convicted of what I'm accused of is 90 days of home confinement. And I've been home now for 656 days, you know, more than, 8 times the 90 days. It is a corporate prosecution designed by Chevron to punish me, to get me to quit the case, and to, as I said, intimidate others into staying away from this kind of human rights and environmental justice work. It's an utter embarrassment for our country. And by the way, it's a litmus test for President Biden. You know, he's purporting to deal with the climate issue, and he cannot let lawyers be locked up for taking on the big fossil fuel polluters and call himself a climate president. So, you know, we've asked his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, again, to take the case back from the private Chevron law firm and prosecute me directly, at which point I suspect he will dismiss the case.
I may be naive, but is there any media interest in this in the United States? You would think this was a case par exemple for the liberal news channels and the liberal newspapers and so on. It's got everything. Ecuador, big oil, a lawyer being locked up. You'd think that this would be a cause célèbre. Is it?
To an extent, the independent media have covered it pretty extensively, and people are outraged. The big corporate media, like, for example, the New York Times or the big networks like CNN, haven't come near it.
I was being naive then.
It's a pretty interesting story when a Harvard law grad, I was classmates of President Obama. You know, I'm a successful human rights lawyer, is locked up without a jury, without a trial for almost 2 years. That is a really fascinating story.
It's Kafkaesque, yeah.
It's Kafkaesque. I've had reporters fly thousands of miles from Europe to interview me in my apartment. And the New York Times office is a 30-minute walk from where I live, and they haven't bothered to drop by yet.
Wow. Might I ask if President Obama knows of the case?
He does know of the case.
Has he done anything?
He helped in the early part of the case on an issue when he was a senator, but no, he has not done anything. I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate for him to do anything. I mean, obviously I want his support and the support of everyone, but I don't know. We need support. We're getting support. We need
if
more
he would say
support.
something, it would be
that would be very helpful.
Yeah,
that would be helpful.
So
George,
what happens? What happens next, Stephen?
Well, you know, I had a non-jury trial last week. It was a farce. I mean, she wouldn't let me defend myself. Wouldn't let me testify in my defense. And she's going to, you know, this judge who's a member of the Chevron-funded Federalist Society, she was not assigned to the case randomly, is going to find me guilty and try to sentence me to prison. And that will play out over the next several weeks here in New York.
See, I don't even understand how a private court can send someone to prison. Surely the state has a monopoly on who goes to prison.
Well, apparently not in the United States.
Wow. This is truly, deeply, madly unbelievable.
And I can tell you, this is a first of its kind type of corporate prosecution. And, you know, everyone who cares about justice and the rule of law needs to make sure it never happens again. And by the way, if you want to help, please go to our website. It's called freedonziger.org. All one word, free, DONZIGER. And you can donate to our legal defense fund and sign up for our campaign, and we'll get you emails about what's going on. You can also follow me on Twitter at @SDonziger, where I post a lot of materials about case updates on Twitter.
Fantastic. Stephen, truly madly unbelievable. My wife told me that the story was like that, but because of the pressure of other things, I'm only now focusing on it. But I promise you, I'm well focused on it now.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it. I just want to mention real quick that I get to go out. It's not like I've just been sitting at home for 2 years. I get to go out for very limited things like school and educational things for my son, legal appointments. And I happen to be out of my home at the moment, which is probably why you're hearing some background noise. But generally, these are very limited forays that happen infrequently, and I have been under house arrest now for 656 days, and I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand that, and I hope everyone will follow you on Twitter now and contribute to your defense. I hope everyone will start to talk about this extraordinary story.
Yeah, it's freedonziger.org.
freedonziger.org. I'll be on it later this evening, I promise you, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
On
Thank you, George. Good luck.
Old Talk
Appreciate it.
Been a pleasure talking to you about a deeply unpleasant story. Now, Galloway's general knowledge coming up, but let me tell you what the result of the poll is. Did the media kill Diana and drive Harry mad? Yes, 42%. No, 31%. 27% of you don't care. Now, you can call me toll-free from the United States. Call me absolutely free in the UK. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522. And in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway at RTUK. Here's the general knowledge. In this week, in 1967, which UK football team won the European Cup? A, Celtic, B, Manchester United, or C, Nottingham Forest? You'll get the result right after the news. It's not the news. It's a break, though. It's a break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
This was the famous Glasgow Celtic, the first British team to win the European Cup. Now let's take some calls. Kenny is in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. I've got a document in front of me about how Israel obtained its land. And a lot of people say it was stolen, but do you mind if I just read some of it out just now?
Briefly, yeah. I mean, not a big tract.
Right, okay. It says, at the end of World War I, some of the Palestinian land was owned by absentee landlords who lived in Cairo, Damascus, and Beirut. Around 80% of Palestinian Arabs were debt-ridden peasants and semi-nomads. Analysis of land purchases from 1880 to 1984 show that 73% of Jewish plots were purchases from large landowners, not poor fellahin. And that's from the Peel Commission in 1937. And it goes on, it says, the Arab charge that Jews had obtained too much a proportion of good land cannot be maintained. Much of the land now carrying orange groves was sand dunes or swamp and uncultivated when purchased.
How long does this racist rant go on, Kenny?
Well...
No, I'm just wondering... Well, I mean, you might as well call the Palestinians sand jockeys. They're debt-ridden peasants. I was almost scratching myself at the image that you were portraying, that Palestine was a swamp and there were no oranges growing. Have you any idea just how wrong you are?
Well, I'm not the author of the article, George.
Let me guide you to some rather more wholesome and accurate documents.
Right.
Palestine was a highly developed Arab country. Who sold land to whom is, of course, not a matter for thee or me. But the one thing we'll need to agree on is that God is not an estate agent. And God didn't grant land to anybody because God doesn't deal in real estate. The State of Israel was formed at a point in which a very clear minority of the population were Jewish. The Balfour Declaration was made promising a national home for the Jewish people, although the second half of the Balfour Declaration actually requires a bit more attention paid to it, because it said that nothing shall be done that will prejudice the civil or religious rights of the people already living there, which of course is a promise not kept. But when the Balfour Declaration was made, less than 10% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. But now we have a situation where the entirety of Palestine, from the river to the sea, is either called Israel, which calls itself the Jewish state, or occupied by Israel illegally and by military force. So I prefer to deal with today and tomorrow rather than 100 years ago, but I'm well equipped to deal with anything you've got to say about 100 years ago. Kenny, go on.
Well, it depends on what you think the appropriate time frame is, because the
anyone
Jews
you like, anyone you like, as long as you're not going to try the old God's an estate agent one, Because that's too laughable. That's too laughable.
I'm not going to say that at all. But what I think the Jews were in Israel as far back as 3,000 years ago.
So you are giving me. So you are giving me the God's an estate agent.
No, I'm just giving you a
Do you know who was
frame.
here, Kenny? Do you know who was here 3,000 years ago? Do you know that the Romans occupied us for 400 years? Well, less than 3,000 years ago. But see if an Italian turns up at my house and says, that's my house, because I lived here 2,000 years ago. Well, you'll get a flea in his ear, Kenny, and I think you'd give him one too if he came to your door, wouldn't you?
Yes, of course, but also goes on with the UN estimates. The property losses by Jews in Arab countries was 10 times that
that's a completely
of
different. But that's a completely different question. That is there. I'm ready to debate it with you anytime. But you're talking about the Palestinians who once had a country and now do not. Who once had a house but now do not. Who once had an orange grove, and I promise you it was not a swamp, but now do not. Who are living in exile, who are living as refugees, who are living as internally displaced people, who are living in Gaza, in an open-air prison camp. Can we deal with them? Can we deal with them in this debate?
Yes, of course. I'm just reading part of the...
I know you're just reading. You've got a script. No, I know you've got a script. But for the interest of the viewer, well, look, stop talking about what happened in Morocco to Jewish people in Morocco. You phoned up to talk about Palestine. You said the Palestinians were debt-ridden peasants and that none of them owned land. It was all owned by absentee landlords. You said that their land was a swamp. You said they had no orange groves. All of that is a racist trope.
Right, okay, well, like I said, I'm not the author of the article.
No, but you're on here reading it out.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting. I wanted to put it to you to see what your point of view on that was.
I've given you my point of view, but much more. Listen, don't listen to me, Kenny. Never listen to me. Don't believe a word I said. Read Israeli historians. Read Gideon Levy, the greatest living Israeli who was on here last week. Read Professor Avi Schleim. Read the finest Jewish Israeli academics. Be gone with you and your debt-ridden peasantry tropes. TP is in Portugal. Wish I was. TP, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Mr. Galloway?
Yes, very clearly.
I quite like your truism to the last caller, by the way. My point is quite simply that, of course, it's Palestine and the Israeli crime minister. I say crime minister because that's what he is, Netanyahu. He wheels out these epithets every time he attacks Gaza and the boycott from sea and such. But I really do think, Mr. Galloway, that the PLO are in the background. I don't think they're up to the job. I don't know whether Hamas is up to the job either. But I think there is a case to, Palestine to be integrated with Arab and the 12 tribes of Israel. God wasn't, I'm a Catholic, and God wasn't a real estate agent, Mr. Galloway. That made me laugh out loud, actually, and I liked it. It was Palestine. We don't know who lived there. The earliest recollections we have, maybe the wandering Romans who got everywhere. Who knows? I don't care. But it's Palestine. It's not Israel, and I'm ambiguous on the state of Israel for what it is. A combination of France and Britain's backdoor tactics. Let's cut it up in the Middle East. There's also the question of Saudi Arabia. There's also the question of Yemen. Where are they with money to rebuild Gaza to go to the United Nations, which is like a leaking chocolate teapot? They can't make a decision. Meanwhile, kids in the Gaza Strip are dying. Israelis are dying. They burst into a house of prayer, which is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was ridiculous, a great ploy by the Prime Minister Netanyahu again. Now we're in a situation again where it drags itself back. I don't think the PLO are helping that much. I don't think their backers are helping that much because they're all abrogating any duty.
Well, they don't have any backers. Let me disabuse you of that. The PLO is completely marginalized in this picture. The Palestine National Authority in Ramallah is virtually powerless. It is penniless. It has long outstayed its mandate. It's been in power for 15 years without a renewed electoral mandate. The Gaza Strip is controlled by the Islamist forces who won the election there but were then blockaded and boycotted, and even Tony Blair, our fellow Roman Catholic, said was a very big mistake. Mr. Blair admitted that he had made the very big mistake of reacting to the Hamas election victory in Gaza by boycott and ostracism and so on. So that's all there is. There's only a small nation of people with no Arab backers, with no money, with no power, with not a single tank, never mind an F-16 with a missile that can be hurled anywhere at the touch of a button from very far away, not a drone, not a heavy gun, nothing. So this is David and Goliath. Go ahead.
Can I say, I mean, Mr. Blair, as you said, another Roman Catholic who doesn't live his faith. He goes and talks to Russian dictators, and he goes on a lecture tour and everything. But for me, I think shows like yours are vital because these questions need to be aired in the real press, not the Murdoch nonsense.
Okay, just one question. What Russian dictators?
Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, they're all under the thrall of Putin.
Well, let's not call them Russian. Let's call them Uzbeks and whatever other stands you were referring to. Thank you very much indeed for that call from Portugal. Wasn't the accent I was expecting, but it was a very nice call. Now, question time. Which country came into existence in this week in 1949? Was it A, India, B, West Germany, C, Rhodesia? It's only for fun. They told me to do it. I'll be back right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Hey you, do you want to know more of what's happening in the world right now? Of course you do. But getting to the heart of the story? Well, that's going to take some hard work. That's why here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we've created that program just for you, hosted by one of the world's most sagacious minds. Get a perspective, an education on stories from all around the world, dissected and discussed with you. Join our debate, vote in our polls on Twitter, tweet a question to George, or call in now to give us your perspective on the stories the rest of the world simply isn't talking about. Join the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees, hosted by one of the world's greatest orators. The Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway. Let's make sense of the world together.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The Mother of All Talk Shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The answer is, of course, West Germany, a country which no longer exists. Making a point I frequently make that countries exist until they no longer exist. Some of my favorite countries in the world no longer exist. The USSR no longer exists. West Germany no longer exists. East Germany no longer exists. Yugoslavia no longer exists. Czechoslovakia no longer exists. Just think about that. Now, the thinking man and woman's President of the United States, or at least Secretary of State, is the great Chris Hedges, journalist, writer, and activist, who joins me now. The proximate reason, Chris, was to reflect on the anniversary of the Watergate break-in. I'm not going to ask you who went through the window and how they got the door open and that kind of thing. I wanted to focus on two things about the Watergate that seem to me of lasting significance, or rather the corollary. We only know about the Watergate, and Nixon only resigned because the United States at that time had a media, had a newspaper industry, including your old manor, in the print side of things, but also, eventually, even on broadcast media. They refused to let the Watergate crime and the conspiracy to cover it up, they refused to let it off the hook. We had a Woodward and a Bernstein. Later, we had a Chris Hedges, but we don't have any of them now. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably still out there, but this, as you're right, the media, especially investigative journalism, is very anemic. Although the Watergate story started out as a police story, it was a burglary, and Woodward and Bernstein were very low-level reporters. But of course, they ran with it, and the press had a kind of vigor and a kind of power. I would add this caveat, George, and that is that kind of activity and worse, break-ins even to the point of political assassinations carried out by the FBI against the Black Panther leader, Fred Hampton, and Mark Clark in Chicago. This stuff, the kind of stuff that the break-in, and it was a wiretap. They had actually got caught the second time they were breaking in because they had broken in May to put 2 wiretaps on the phone. One of them was faulty, and they'd gone back in to correct it. That's when they got caught. But that kind of activity, and worse, frankly, had been carried out for over a decade against anti-war dissidents, left-wing groups, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the press didn't react at all. And it didn't. The reason it reacted in Watergate is because Nixon and those around him overstepped and went after another center of power. And I think we do have to be clear that these tactics, and much worse, had long been visited, especially on the anti-war left, and the press had done frighteningly little.
Here's my second point then, that it was worth doing from Nixon's point of view because there was an alternative party and program and leadership that was worth bugging, worth undermining. But there isn't now, is there? You couldn't tell the difference between your normal Republican. I mean, if you showed me Nancy Pelosi's speeches without me knowing she made them, and showed me the Republican congressional leader, Schumer, is it? It would be impossible to tell the difference between these two. In the 60s and 70s, at least, there were 2 parties. It's my thesis that there now is only one party in the United States.
That's right. And the last real anti-war candidate, progressive, was McGovern. Which is why when he got the nomination, and it was through a kind of insurgency within the party, the Democratic Party elite allied with the Republican Party elite under Nixon to crush him, which they did quite successfully. And after the election, it came out that there were all sorts of, again, dirty tricks that were used, embraced by the hierarchies of both parties. And that the Democratic Party created a system. That's where superdelegates come in and everything else, so that they would never have another McGovern. Again, I knew McGovern not well, but I knew him, and he was a man of deep integrity and a highly decorated bomber pilot in World War II. He himself, he came out of that military experience and understood the danger of what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. So yes, he was the last. We had Henry Wallace, who was destroyed in '48. He had been Roosevelt's vice president, the anti-war candidate. The next one we had of any significance, certainly in terms of a Democratic nominee, was McGovern. And then that's right, we began this kind of rolling corporate coup d'etat. And so it's just a one-party, a kind of corporate duopoly is the best way. Ralph.
Yeah, I mean, they killed Kennedy, they destroyed McGovern, and then it was basically business as usual for the business. Whoever got the gig, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama, they followed essentially the same policies, and not least in the international field, which is what I'd like your view on, if you would kindly give it me. We now have a situation where Donald Trump seemed to be the most effusive supporter of Israel in the White House, but Joe Biden is following exactly the same policies. He's just signed over almost $800 million worth of new weapons on top of the weapons that he had already signed over and the U.S. had already given. On top of the money, the daily subvention given by the U.S. To Israel. Almost whatever they do, whatever crime they commit, they can still count on the U.S. support, whoever is in power.
Yeah, I mean, the rhetoric is a little different, but that's all that's different. Nobody's moving the embassy back to Tel Aviv from Jerusalem, which is in violation of international law. We forget that Schumer supported Trump's moving of the embassy, and Trump didn't actually move the embassy. The decision to move the embassy was almost unanimously passed by Congress during the Clinton administration, and then you had 6-month waivers. So the president could sign a waiver to delay the moving of the embassy because it wasn't a propitious time, and all Trump did was not sign the waiver. So yes, there's completely bipartisan support. In fact, what opposition there was within the American political establishment to the overreach of Israel, actually, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, came from the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. But now they're all in lockstep with this, crypto-fascist apartheid regime that has, led by Bibi Netanyahu, that has destroyed Israel. I find many, I used to live in Israel. I mean, I find many parallels between what's happened in Israel and what's happened in the United States, including the grotesque social inequality, the assault on civil liberties, and not just against Palestinians, but against Israeli human rights groups and Israeli journalists. The country has become very, very ugly in the same way that I think the United States has.
Yes, I also frequently lived in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in Shankin Street, I used to take my coffee in Dizengoff Square, and I was surrounded by peace and justice campaigners. There were real journalists uncovering scandals, and there were people ready to demonstrate against crimes at the drop of a hat. Significant numbers of such people. So one or two of them were even in the Knesset. Shulamit Aloni was a friend of mine. She even made minister at one stage. But that's all gone now, just like McGovern and Kennedy are gone. Now, Miko Peled tells me this evening that while the rest of the world can see that the last week's efforts by Netanyahu were disastrous on the military, political, public relations level, in Israel they're wildly popular. If he does get an election next week, he'll win it.
Right. I mean, and look who's contesting the election or contesting the leadership. It's the far right, the ultra right, and the ultra right. I mean, I don't know how else to describe these people. That has become the kind of political coloring that has seized power, moved to the center of power in ways that were unthinkable when I lived in Jerusalem. I mean, these are the inheritors of the old Kahana party. I mean, overt Avigdor Lieberman, all these kind of people, overt racists, calling for some of these minority parties, calling for the complete expulsion of all Palestinians, not just in the occupied territories, but within Israel itself. So, the deformities that have taken place in Israel for many of the same reasons, I think parallel the kind of deformities that we've seen in the United States. And this is why Biden is such a dangerous figure, because what he's done is it's this kind of utopian nostalgia, like Franz von Papen in 1932 thought that they could erase the Nazis by, going back to the conservative past. Well, that's exactly what Biden and the Democratic Party leadership and a significant part of the old Republican Party establishment are attempting to do, but it won't work. And we have midterms coming up, and all projections show that the Democrats will lose their majority in the House. Trump remains ascendant because all of the structural issues that created a figure like Trump have not only not gone away but gotten worse. That's another show. But all of the relief efforts that have been passed by the Biden administration, when you look at them, are going to corporations or going to state governments. They're not actually going to the people who need it.
Some things changed, though. Bernie Sanders, whom we thought had gone to sleep for the duration, did get back on his feet and tried to delay the military largesse that Biden wants to send to Netanyahu. And AOC, often maligned, including by me, actually described Israel as an apartheid state, which would get you expelled from the British Labour Party were you to say such a thing. These were welcome developments, weren't they?
Yes, although, we have to be clear that within the Democratic Party establishment, neither AOC or Bernie Sanders have any real power. But the fact that members of Congress are willing to even speak this truth is significant, because even a couple years ago, when they had this, the Senate voted 100%. I think it was 2014 when Israel was bombing Gaza for 51 days, killing over 2,200 Palestinians, including 551 children. The Senate passed a resolution, which even Bernie voted for, defending Israel's or justifying Israel's right to, quote unquote, defend itself. So yes, these cracks have appeared, but they've appeared because the Democratic base is just not buying it, and the American public isn't buying it anymore. So Biden's kind of lockstep with Zionism is actually a kind of fossil. It doesn't within the power elite, it may have a certain amount of cachet, but even within the Democratic Party, people are, I think, finally woken up to the reality of what Israel is.
Now, finally, and I'm grateful for your time, at the time, I considered Richard Nixon to be almost demonic. I really saw him as Mephistopheles. But now, looking back, Nixon had, in foreign policy terms, a far surer hand and a far greater strategic understanding of the world than what we've got now. Is there anything in that?
Yeah, I mean, Biden is a pretty empty vessel. And there's not much there. I mean, they can trot him out and he can read the teleprompter. But in terms of actually having any real substance, yeah, I mean, Nixon was a very complex individual. I mean, at the time of Watergate, it also came out that the administration was secretly training, I think, 10 or 15,000 Thai mercenaries to go into Laos, and then you had the secret bombing of Cambodia. I mean, so there was a very dark side to Nixon, both domestically and internationally, but there was also a depth. And the other thing, which Ralph Nader also points out, is that the last pieces of progressive legislation, the Mine and Safety Act, the Clean Water Act, OSHA, all got passed under Nixon, not because Nixon was a friend of the environment, but because we had movements, and Nixon was very frightened of movements, as every politician should be. And part of our problem now is that our movements have been virtually eradicated, including our labor unions.
Bravo, brilliantly put. Thank you very much, as always, Chris Hedges, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, how's that poll? The poll's closed. Did the media kill Diana and drive Harry mad? 42% think yes, 31% think no, and 27% just don't care. And there's a second poll. Here it is. Who should Britain send to Eurovision 2022? A. Adele, B. James Corden, who he, and C. Ozzy Osbourne. Who writes this stuff? After the news, it's the Right Honourable Norman Baker. It's, remember her name, Rachel Blevins, and it's the irrepressible Patrick Christys, plus all of your calls. Now, have I got a question? Is there a last question? No, thank God, no more of these questions. Let me, please, have Jamie Lowe's last news bulletin of the evening.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
At least 8 people have died after a cable car fell on a mountain near Lake Maggiore in northern Italy today. The accident happened on a service taking passengers from the resort towns of Stresa up the nearby Matori Peak in the Piedmont region. An image posted on social media by emergency services showed the wreckage of the car lying in a wooded area. Officials say 2 children were taken from the scene to a paediatric hospital in Turin by helicopter. The cause of the incident remains unclear, but local reports suggest the cable carrying it may have failed about 300 metres from the top of the mountain. The BBC's reputation has been, quote, highly damaged following an inquiry into the Panorama interview with Diana, Princess of Wales, Home Secretary Priti Patel has said. She commented that Lord Dyson's probe into how Martin Bashir obtained the interview 25 years ago was a really significant moment for the BBC. The independent inquiry found that Bashir used deception, including the forging of bank statements, to get it. Asked whether the corporation would survive, Patel said it would have to, quote, reflect and learn lessons. She added that it had been utterly heartbreaking to hear Diana's sons Prince William and Prince Harry speaking, quote, in very personal terms about their mother following the publication of the report last week. The report by former senior judge Lord Dyson found that Bashir was unreliable, dishonest, and that the BBC fell short of its high standards when answering questions about the interview. In response, Bashir said that he, quote, never wanted to harm, adding, I don't believe we did. In the 1995 World exclusive interview, Princess Diana confirmed Prince Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles and described in frank detail how she believed royal life had made her bulimic. Patel has also denied claims the UK government pursued a herd immunity policy early in the pandemic. The Prime Minister's former aide, Dominic Cummings, has claimed the original plan was to let the virus spread through the population, thereby achieving so-called herd immunity. And had scientific advice been followed, there would have been no need for lockdowns. Cummings said Number 10 later realised herd immunity would be a catastrophe. But the UK Health Security Agency chief said allowing people to become infected, quote, has never been on the agenda. Dr. Jenny Harries says she has never been in a government meeting where herd immunity was put forward as a mechanism of control for the pandemic. She said she would not comment on what Cummings would say ahead of his appearance in front of a parliamentary committee on Wednesday, but added, "Our strategy was always about public health, saving lives and protecting the NHS." Cummings is also expected to claim before the committee that the Prime Minister missed 5 crucial COVID planning meetings because he was writing a biography of Shakespeare, which he needed to complete to pay for a divorce settlement with his former wife. The Pfizer and AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccines are highly effective against the variant identified in India after 2 doses, a study has found. 2 jabs of either vaccine gave a similar level of protection against symptomatic disease from the Indian variant as they do for the Kent one. However, both vaccines were only 33% effective against the Indian variant 3 weeks after the first dose. This is compared with 50% effectiveness against the Kent variant. Public Health England, which ran the study, said the vaccines are likely to be even more effective at preventing hospital admissions and deaths. 21 runners have died after extreme weather struck a long-distance race in northwestern China. High winds and freezing rain hit the participants in the 100 kilometres ultra-marathon in the Yellow River Stone Forest, a tourist site in Gansu province, on Saturday. The race was halted when some of the 172 runners went missing and a rescue operation was launched. Many of the stranded runners reportedly suffered from hypothermia. Officials said 151 runners were now confirmed safe and that 8 of them were injured. The lead singer of the Italian band, which won the Eurovision Song Contest, has denied taking drugs following online speculation over live competition footage showing him leaning over a table. Maneskin's Damiano David rejected the idea that he'd been taking cocaine. He claimed that he didn't do drugs at a press conference. In a statement, Eurovision said the singer would take a voluntary drug test after arriving home. Maneskin, who had been favourites to win the contest, took the top prize with their song Zitti e Buoni. Viewers speculated as to what the singer was doing when he appeared to bend his face towards a table as the band celebrated their victory during the live broadcast. An image that appears to show Dubai's missing Princess Latifah has been posted on a social media account. If legitimate, the post would be the first time Princess Latifah bin Mohammed Al Maktoum has been seen in public since she claimed in video messages that she was being held hostage by her father in the United Arab Emirates. Her father, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, has consistently denied these claims. The image, uploaded to Instagram 2 days ago, appears to have been taken recently in the Mall of the Emirates in Dubai. And finally, if you have ever wondered what it would be like to be a passenger on the Titanic, and why would you, a theme park in China is set to offer the closest experience you can get. A massive replica of the sunken ocean liner is now under construction in Daying County in Sichuan province. Called the Unsinkable Titanic, the ship is the exact same size as the original, 269.06 metres in length and 28.19 metres wide. The centrepiece of a theme park called Romandacy will have the same amenities as its namesake, including banquet halls, theatres, observation decks and a swimming pool. Guests will be able to pay to spend the night aboard the ship, which will be permanently docked in a reservoir in the Xizang River, about 130 kilometres from the provincial capital Chengdu, several hundred miles from the sea. And as far as we know, an iceberg is not being worked on and visitors won't need to wear life jackets. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A fascinating array of newspapers, including one that we picked up in Batley in Spain, in Bristol actually, which is the News of the World from June the 9th, 1946. And look at some of the stories on it. Arab chiefs hold talks on Palestine. Stalin's health puzzles Russians. President Truman's revelation that Generalissimo Stalin's doctors forbid him to fly to Washington has, I hear, amazed the Russian people who had no idea that their leader was ill. The V-Day millions cheering the parade of Allied might. More on the papers later, but let me take a call from Victor in Greenwich on the BBC. Go ahead, Victor.
Good evening, George. I trust you're well. You sound in full form.
I'm in full form. Thank you very much, Victor. Kind of you.
My pleasure. Now, we both agree there's a problem with the Blairite Broadcasting Corporation.
The Bush and Blair Corporation, yes.
Yes. Well, I think it was Blair that took it over more than Bush.
Yeah, of course.
You must remember the incident when Dr. Kelly, before he very conveniently cut most of his wrists and killed himself, if you believe what the BBC told us.
Well, wait till you see my film on the 17th of July, Killing Kelly. It'll open your eyes, Victor.
I'm looking forward to it, George. I'm burning to watch it. Believe I want you to come to the South London Co-op Film Show and introduce it to us.
I'd be delighted. I'd be delighted. Thank you.
I'll remind you of that and hold you to it.
Yeah, you can hold me to it, yeah.
We know that after this Kelly incident, somehow or other, Blair managed to arrange it so that the guy who told us what we all know is true, there was no weapons of mass destruction, there was only a Blairite weapon of mass deception. Somehow or other, because the BBC allowed his words to be transmitted and us to hear the truth rather inconveniently for Blair and his regime, for some reason, by some gymnastics of logic, it was necessary to replace the top directors of the BBC and replace them with Blairite stooges, rather like the editor of the Mirror also got replaced.
Yes.
And I think that's the genesis of our problems with the BBC.
I don't want to give away too much about the film, but Greg Dyke, the former Director General of the BBC, is in the film. And I made the point to him in my interview with him that the only people that lost their jobs as a result of the Iraq War were Piers Morgan, Greg Dyke, and me. The people that people who actually carried out the crimes have gone on to greater things.
Well, they always reward the people who help with the war crimes. But didn't some of Greg's colleagues also lose their
yes, Andrew Gilligan, he also lost his job. But that's it. 4 of us. Robin Cook, you might say, subject of my next film. You could say he walked rather than was pushed, but you could say he lost his job over the war. But that's it. Everybody else, all the Andrew Marr, who hailed the fall of Baghdad as being the birth of a new Blair era, who stood tall, much taller than he stood before, and so on. They're all still at the top.
Well, these war criminals do look after their stooges, don't they, George?
Yes, they do.
They say they do well.
They do.
So it sounds a bit like today's so-called Labour Party. There was a bit of a purge going on, wasn't there?
Well, there's nobody left to purge. But they are, of course, now 18 points behind in the opinion polls. Labour is now at 28%. You and I are old enough to remember the last time that happened. It was in the depth of Michael Foot's leadership at the height of the Falklands furore. That's the last time Labour was at 28%, Victor.
But if you believe Blairite Brainwashing Corporation, you'd have thought the only reason Labour was ever unpopular was it had that Corbyn extremist in charge, and they didn't do enough to get rid of these horrible neo-Nazi anti-Semites
although now that mysteriously disappeared. There is no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party now, just like that. Because Keir Starmer is the leader.
Well, exactly. Keir Starmer is the greatest guy, according to Blairite brainwashing, since Churchill defeated anti-Semitism in 45, isn't he?
Well,
he's a great hero, Mr. Starmer.
Yeah, but not for much longer. Trust me. After the Batley and Spen by-election, Keir Starmer will be on his way out the door. There'll be a leadership challenge. Victor, thank you for the call. I've got the Right Honourable Norman Baker, only again on audio because of a Zoom problem, but I'm always happy to speak with Norman, former MP, former minister, prolific author, and the proximate reason for his appearance this evening, a royal biographer. As a manner of speaking anyway, he's not actually particularly a royalist, but he keeps a very close eye on royal matters because they matter. They matter, if only because the country spends a very great deal of time on them. He's also done certain age, like myself. He remembers the Diana affair, and I wanted to get his take on what's been revealed about the Diana interviews and what it led to. Norman, thanks again for joining us. I know you've just come off air yourself from your own radio show. Is it the case, do you think, as Andrew Neil claims, that Martin Bashir, Panorama, the BBC, led directly to the death of Diana?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, Martin Bashir clearly behaved in an inappropriate way, I might say an unprofessional way. And I think what he did manufacturing bank statements deserved to get him the sack. But that's a long, long way from suggesting he was responsible for Diana's death. The fact is that she was happy to agree to the programme. She appeared to be quite happy with it afterwards. And that's it. The reason she was there may have been under false pretenses, but she was happy with the final result. The reason Diana died...
She only did the interview because of the false prospectus that had been laid out in front of her, which was the responsibility of Bashir.
Yes, that's probably true. She may, who knows, she may have agreed to do it without that. But in any case, she was happy with the final product. And I think it's ludicrous to say that, as some people have said today, that including Prince William, I think, that there was some connection between that interview and her death. Her death has multiple reasons, but that's really not one of them.
Well, let me play Prince William's advocate. The paranoia and suspicion and hatred was given a very significant twist by the Martin Bashir interview. It was based on forgery. The BBC covered up the forgery. In fact, Martin Bashir was brought back to the BBC by, for now, Lord Hall, whose peerage must be in some doubt now, and made the religious affairs editor. But the paranoia and the hatred, which was given such a twist, led to Diana dispensing with or having taken from her her title, therefore her security, and therefore in the hands of Dodi Fayed's security.
Well, George, look, there's two separate things here. The BBC behaved irresponsibly. First of all, Martin Bashir behaved in an unprofessional way. Secondly, the BBC didn't investigate it properly and looked like they covered it up. And thirdly, there is certainly a question mark to be asked about why he was re-engaged as religious affairs correspondent in 2016. All those matters are perfectly germane. But it's a long, long way to say from that is somehow responsible for Diana's death. What that interview did was give her her voice. She said what she wanted to say. She was a strong woman. she said what she wanted to say, and she said there are 3 people in this marriage, and it's very clear that the way the royal family treated her was a contributory factor. So I think they're offloading their own guilt, frankly, onto the BBC. They treated her the same way, perhaps, they're treating Meghan Markle at the moment. And I have to say one more thing, if I may, at this point, is Andrew Marr. You mentioned him with your conversation with Victor a moment ago. Andrew Marr today interviewing Priti Patel. I mean, Priti Patel trying to take the high ground about how the BBC should behave. This is the woman who was sacked for improper contact with the Israeli government when Theresa May had to sack her, and then wasn't sacked by Boris Johnson when she was found guilty of bullying civil servants. So she's in no position to start lecturing the BBC.
Well, all of these are tangential points. Let's focus on where this all leaves the royal family. Harry seems to be disappearing into a vortex, a rabbit hole of therapies and television appearances. Where's this going to end?
Well, it's going to end with him finally cutting all ties with the royal family. I mean, he's very well on the way to that. Your description is very good, George, a vortex of therapies. That's actually where he is at the moment, and no doubt led on to some degree by Meghan and her Californian friends for whom therapies are bread and butter, if you like. Yeah. So that will carry on like that. I mean, I have to say the royal family does not like people who are independent-minded. The position doesn't like independent-minded women. We saw that with Diana. We're seeing it again with Meghan Markle, and to some degree with Fergie as well. So the royal family has to change. It cannot continue to behave in this starchy way it has done for the last hundreds of years. And, there'll be a crunch point. At the moment, nobody wants to particularly be offensive because the Queen's 95 and people, by and large, think she's done a good job. But when Charles takes over, we're in a different situation.
Do you think it'll be open season on the concept of monarchy when Charles takes over?
I think monarchy is ultimately will have to go. There was an opinion poll recently, last week I think, which showed that the majority of those who had expressed an opinion, of those who were under, I think it was under 25 or under 30, thought the monarchy should go. And this is a generation which is now coming through. You know, the generation of 75-year-olds, 85-year-olds who are very loyal to the Queen, you know, they're going to be, you know, off this mortal coil in the same way as she is before very long. And the younger generation don't see the point of a starchy monarchy. I don't blame them.
If I were the firm, I'd skip Charles and go straight to William. I think he's enormously popular.
Well, I don't know if he's enormously popular, but he's probably more popular than Charles, who seemed to be a bit of a weirdo. But of course, you can't do that, George, because the whole point of monarchy, if you believe in monarchy, is the hereditary principle, that the person thrown up to be the next monarch is automatically the best person to occupy that seat. And once you start changing the rules, it's only one step away from saying, let's have someone else of our choice. And, whether it's in the royal family, someone of our choice, or someone outside the royal family. So they have to stick very rigidly to the hereditary principle, whoever it throws up. It can throw up someone diligent like the Queen, or it can throw up a neo-Nazi like Edward VIII. You know, you don't get to choose these matters.
Bristlingly militant, Right Honourable Norman Baker. I predict you're not going to get a knighthood anytime soon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me go. I was looking for the results of the poll. Can I do that? Yeah. Who should Britain send to Eurovision 2022? I didn't write this, by the way. I have no idea even who one of those people is. Who should Britain send to Eurovision? 30% say Adele. Surely she'd win it out of the park, unless it's political. B, James Corden, 16%. But somebody called Ozzy Osbourne is on 54%. What is Ozzy Osbourne, is what I'm asking. Call me an old fogey if you like. Now, one person who's definitely not an old fogey and who undoubtedly knows who Ozzy Osbourne is the rising star of American broadcasting. And if I've got anything to do with it, a rising star of American politics. She's my colleague, Rachel Blevins, and I'm glad to say she joins me again. On the subject, Rachel, if I may, that I've just been talking with the Right Honourable Norman Baker about, the Harry-Meghan thing. Many people here in Britain think that marrying an American and moving to California is injurious to your mental health, because Harry is appearing more and more strange every time we see him on TV. What's your take on that as an American broadcaster yourself?
Well, George, I'd say that it may be hurting his mental health, but it's certainly helping the media over here. And I think that that's one of the things that has come out of this entire scandal, the story, when we're talking about what the BBC did and what they covered up when it came to Princess Diana. And yet when you look at people like Princess Diana and like Prince Harry, they are looking towards those people in the media, those interviews, those bombshell discussions that we talk about for weeks and weeks at a time. They're looking at those discussions and feeling like they can trust the person on the other end. But what we've learned from the BBC, or even from the great Oprah Winfrey interview over here, is that when it comes to the mainstream media, they're looking at these figures and they are seeing the dollar signs. They're seeing the ratings and what they can get out of it. And so I think when it comes to Prince Harry, it certainly seems like he is searching for something and at the same time trying to keep his new American wife happy. And it's heartbreaking to see how he's sort of going down that same path. We know how much his mother struggled. Now we're having to watch how much he is struggling, and putting it all out in front of the public eye at a time when the media doesn't care. They don't care about whether it's a hard day. They don't care about whether he is struggling with anxiety and depression and it looks like his condition is getting worse. They care about the clicks that they're getting, how many people are going to be watching that interview. And I think that's what we have to come back to at the end of the day. And it is incredibly sad when it comes to these people, because even though they may be members of the royal family, they're still people.
What about Bill Gates? He's still people too. And I suppose you would need to have the hardest of hearts not to feel sorry that Bill and Melinda are no more, even though they're sharing quite a large pot of alimony. But it seems to me that things are rattling down for Bill Gates too. He's far from the paragon of virtue that he liked to imply before.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because on one end of the spectrum, you have the royal family and you have celebrities where the media will tear them apart and talk about them to no end. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like Bill Gates, who is essentially untouchable. I mean, you look at the media coverage of him over the last year before this divorce announcement, and you would think that he was the greatest of all time. I mean, he was on all of these top networks, giving all of these interviews, acting like he was an infectious disease expert for the last year, talking about COVID, being seen as a great leader. And then all of a sudden we find out that he's getting a divorce. And then on top of that, we start hearing that there are a number of affairs, that he had, agreements going into his marriage to see an ex-girlfriend of his. And then we're hearing more and more scandalous stories. And it brings us back to remembering that of all we know about Bill Gates, we also know that he was good friends with well-known child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. We know that Bill Gates went to see Epstein at his estate a number of times. And we also know that he flew on his private jet. And all of this happened not decades ago, but just 8 years ago, at a time when Epstein was already a registered sex offender, and yet Bill Gates was spending time with him. So I think whenever it comes to him as a figure, there's a lot more that we don't know, and hopefully a lot more that we'll continue to find out as it comes out.
I wonder what first attracted him to the sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Perhaps, as you say, we'll find out. Lastly, my perception is, I might be wrong, that the last week has been very bad for Netanyahu and Israel, at least in public relations terms, that more people opposed what they were doing than had ever opposed them before. More people felt more sympathy for the Palestinian cause in the United States and in Britain and indeed around the world. Is that your reading? And if so, was that reflected in the media?
I would say that it does seem like we're seeing more and more support for that cause, certainly more than we saw even back just in 2014. I mean, we're seeing rallies in major cities, people taking to the streets, people actually talking about the plight of the Palestinian people. And I think that's an excellent point you make, is that when you look at the media coverage, that simply is not reflective at all. Instead, we're seeing the media become even more hush-hush now that they hear about a ceasefire, now that they hear about terms where Israel says that they're going to stop bombing, at least for now. You know, the media kind of takes that and runs with it and decides to just stop talking about all of the Palestinian people who just lost their homes, who just lost their source of food and water and are still struggling. Well, they don't care as much about their plight. And I think that there was one thing that happened this week that was incredibly notable, which is that the New York Times allowed a full-page ad in their newspaper, which called out supermodels Gigi and Bella Hadid, along with pop star Dua Lipa. It showed these three young women on this ad, and it referred to them as anti-Semitic and said that they supported a second Holocaust, all because they were speaking up about the plight of the Palestinian people. And I think that right there, the fact that the New York Times would allow something like that shows so much where they stand, that they were willing to risk a libel lawsuit by allowing something to be printed that was so categorically false. And yet at the same time, there's a lot of coverage that they're missing there. So I think this is one of those stories that is only going to keep coming back around when the public keeps making it come back around and they keep speaking out about it.
I saw that full-page ad, Rachel, and I thought it was an incitement to violence. I thought that the New York Times were placing these three young women in danger of a violent attack or worse. I was actually genuinely shocked by the New York Times publishing that. Is there any controversy about it? Have the young women hit back?
We've heard some responses. I know Dua Lipa responded to it and made it clear that absolutely she did not say anything that was anti-Semitic, which was clear if you looked at the original statement she put out. But we also have to remember that for Gigi and Bella Hadid, they are part Palestinian. So this ad is claiming that they are not allowed to speak about their heritage, to say anything about the place where they're from, and that if they do, then it will be taken as anti-Semitic. And I think, to your point, it almost makes a cause for violence, and it sends out a message to any other person around their age group who may be popular in popular culture, whether it be around here in the US or anywhere else, that they can't speak out, that they can't say similar things and speak up for people who are being threatened with airstrikes by a super close US ally. I mean, to set that precedent is incredibly troubling, especially at a time when we should be cheering on these people who are actually paying attention to what is going on with US foreign policy and in other parts of the world. I mean, the fact that they want to just shove them into a bubble and don't want to hear what they have to say is just, it's crazy to me.
Rachel, fantastic. I wish we had more time. We'll see you again next week, God willing, and we will continue our look at American media and, of course, politics, which can't be separated from it. The poll is going well. Who should Britain send to the Eurovision? It looks like Ozzy Osbourne is getting the gig. Now, there's a general knowledge quiz, but I no longer have it because it's been taken away. So mercifully, I don't have to do that. Because right after this break, it is the fizzing, irrepressible, and somewhat mysterious Patrick Christys. I promise you, you don't want to miss it.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. So what exactly are you on here telling me that it's not infectious?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy.
Well, I'm going to quote Doctor, and he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You know, you can watch it for yourself.
Yeah. You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities. I can trust them, or I can go with wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not.
Wee Ben on YouTube.
Am on the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. Look, you started out by saying COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we've paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile nonsense.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Now, the question that I had lost was what was significant about the message, "What hath God wrought?" In 1844, that's how they talked then. Was it A, the San Francisco earthquake, B, the first telegraph, or C, the YMCA formed? Who writes this stuff? Anyway, I'm joined by the wonderful Patrick Christys, my old friend. Patrick, we've not got unlimited time.
Yep.
Let's plunge right into it. Seems to me, perusing the front pages, which is all I've had time to do, it's the BBC and it's the Royals. Now, the Right Honourable Norman Baker was stoutly defending the BBC as a good Liberal would. I'm saying it's the end for the BBC. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly damaging. I think it's the sinister nature of what happened there. Martin Bashir had to go to extreme lengths to dupe Princess Diana into absolutely all of it. Now, I don't think there's a question that she would have done the interview anyway. I think she would have, but it's the tone of what she said, the damage and the fallout that happened after that. Now, if you compare this to the things that we've seen in the past with things like phone hacking and people going through people's bins, the bad days, or I suppose good days, depending on which way you look at it, of journalism, now, that was tend to be done by someone who was your kind of typical gutter press merchant, right? Martin Bashir was almost like the smiling, sharply suited face of the gutter press. And make no mistake, that's what the BBC now clearly is. What they did there was bang out
Except
order.
at public expense.
We paid for the privilege.
At least your tabloid reptile is being paid by a private company.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas what Martin Bashir...
I'm not forced to pay him.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff coming out. Now, we will never know the truth behind this, but Earl Spencer came out today in some of the papers and said he even suspected Martin Bashir of planting a listening device in the room to help fuel Princess Diana's speculation. The lengths that this guy went to. And it is the damage that's been done after that as well. It clearly will have soured the relationship between her and Charles, though, to be fair. I think it was probably rocky anyway. And that knock-on effect that had on William and Harry. And this is as bad as it gets to BBC. The next time that they lecture us and they go holier than thou on anything, frankly, you have to look at it and go, you've had Bashir, you've had the helicopter over Cliff Richard's house, the Jimmy Savile stuff, which is as bad as it gets, right? And making old people pay for the privilege.
Rolf Harris, Stuart
take your pick. Making old people pay for a bit of company in their own homes. I mean, they're awful. If this was someone else doing it, we would rightly be saying, boycott. And I want to know, where's hope, not hate on this? Where's Hugh Grant when you need him? Where is he on all this?
Absolutely silent about media abuse, but not when it's the BBC. let's put, look, in practical terms, if you as a journalist forged material to make me believe that my wife had been deceiving me, stealing from me, or whatever, you're responsible for whatever then happens between me and my wife.
Yeah.
Because it was all a lie. Yeah. And the forgeries were what fueled the flames which eventually consumed everybody.
Now, I'm not a massive fan of Prince Harry, but I think what Prince William's statement, as meticulous as it was and quite classy of him, he stopped short of drawing a direct link between the Bashir interview and what happened under a bridge in Paris. Right now, OK, Prince Harry didn't stop too short of that.
No, neither did Andrew Neil, interestingly.
Neither did Andrew Neil. And there's that argument. Would that have happened? Would she have ended up under a bridge in Paris with a drunk driver at the wheel, essentially on her own, if it hadn't have been for the Bashir interview? And that is absolutely massive, right? And I think that's something that can't be underestimated. Martin Bashir, I felt, got it all wrong. That's something that's in today's papers. Again, Bashir bites back. He's come and said, look, actually, it had no bearing on what she said. That's rubbish, right? You know, that is absolute lunacy at all.
Why did he do it then?
Well, exactly, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
If he was going to do the interview anyway, why did he need to forge the document?
And the BBC went, well, we learned lessons from it. He didn't learn lessons from it. He had an inquest into it, an inquiry into it in 1996, and he rehired him as, ironically, religion editor for a man with no morals.
Not just correspondent, but editor, with presumably a team under him. Here's a call from Cynthia in Westminster on the subject. Cynthia, welcome.
Hiya. I'm just surprised that everyone thinks that the whole of the country has had selective amnesia. What about Andrew Morton's book? We all read everything she said at that interview. It was in the book 3 years prior to the actual interview. I think it's just a reimagining history, because we're getting ready for Charles to become king, and his big blot is that infamous affair that he had with Camilla, his now wife. So, you know, I just think it's a bit of a reach to blame the only person of colour journalist that did something bad during that infamous and awful time where all of the royal family were getting ribbed by the media.
Well, I cannot exculpate him because of his colour.
Yeah, but it just seems a bit strange that they're focusing on this one journalist.
But I'm not focusing on it. I'm focusing on Lord Hall, who not only hired him, but brought him back and gave him a promotion, and who is now sitting as a legislator in the House of Lords. He's not a person of colour. I'm focusing on the BBC as a whole, which is not run by people of colour. But what do you say to Cynthia's point?
Look, first and foremost, I'm not going to say that I think Prince Charles was a fantastic husband. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is it's a question of accountability, and it's accountability at the taxpayer's expense, Cynthia, isn't it? You know, look, just because Princess Diana may or may not have said that anyway, the fact is that Martin Bashir massively sexed up a load of completely fraudulent documents that led to that interview, and therefore I think affected the tone of that interview that had some very real consequences. And, all right, she may or may not have said that stuff anyway, but he did lie, and he has to be able to account for that.
But, I mean, I take umbrage with the fact that you've got this woman, she's dead, she spoke her truth, as they say. You know, she spoke that in a book that was written that was a bestseller.
Yeah, but it was much more powerful on television, wasn't it, Cynthia?
It came from her
because you saw her lips moving and the words coming out.
We can't have this society where women's voices are erased, and I think that's what's happening. I mean, you know, unfortunately, her son used the phrase paranoid, which, you know, she was never diagnosed as that. I mean, anyone would be paranoid.
Well, I don't know what... yeah, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah, exactly, but I just think it's
you're not invalidating William's right to say that, are you?
I think so. I think it's part of a script by the firm, which is let's forget about how awful we were to this 19-year-old woman that we coerced into the family. Let's forget about what we really are about, which is that having this culture where women aren't allowed to speak out against anything. That, you know, Catherine's brilliant because she's walks 3 steps behind her husband. That's not
I don't think she does walk 3 steps behind her husband. I think people think she's brilliant. People think she's brilliant.
No, I think the narrative...
If they think that, and it's not for that reason.
I think
Why are you so against Catherine?
No, I'm not against Catherine, but I think the narrative is in the royal family that women who have opinions, who have voices, are not allowed to speak. And any woman that enters that family, whether it's Fergie or Diana or now Meghan Markle, is trashed. You have all these male journalists trashing women because they've got an opinion. And I just think this is to do this
Cynthia,
to this woman that's in a great...
Fergie was trash. Cynthia, Fergie was trash. Nobody needed to trash her.
Well, you know what? Women should be allowed to have voices and should be able to speak their truth. And Diana did that, and we shouldn't invalidate what she said in that interview.
Doesn't matter what they do.
That one journalist got that story in a dodgy way. I mean, they all get stories in a dodgy way.
Right.
Let's just be honest.
All right.
They're all at it.
Cynthia, thanks for the call. Let's hear from Simon in London.
How you doing, George? You okay?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I really don't care about Diana, to be honest with you. What I care about is the fact that, and the elephant in the room, there's a BBC live to us during the Iraq War and resulted in the death of millions. That alone is worth kicking them off the air and making them into a pay-per-view service, you know? And they banned television networks like Press TV for minor things, things I wouldn't even consider to be issues. And yet they basically said a massive lie on TV, resulted in various deaths, resulted in the death of Dr. Kelly, which you're reporting on, of course. I mean, more recently, if you really want to go into the celebrity side of things, what they did to Cliff Richard was unforgivable. I mean, they flew a helicopter over his house, they collaborated with the police. He was completely innocent. He was found to be innocent, or certainly they didn't find anything wrong with him or what he did. He was never arrested or charged, and yet they flew a helicopter over his house and, in essence, tried to make him look bad, and did make him look bad. And it was devastating. Well, if you read what they did to him, it was heartbreaking.
I followed it closely. Simon, thanks for that. Patrick, that is the point, isn't it? It's not just this one damn thing. It's one damn thing after another.
It's absolutely one damn... And we said that earlier on, didn't we? And it's the fact that even when they knew, and they unequivocally knew what had happened in relation to that Diana interview, for 25 years, that interview was doing the rounds. They kept wheeling it out. They dined out on it. There was no attempt whatsoever to suppress it. In fact, it was actively promoted. And that's the real thing. And now, look, it's wrong anyway, what happened, but if there are certain establishments in the media, or certain outlets in the media maybe that did it, unfortunately, you might say, well, it's a bit par for the course. But the BBC, at our expense, holds itself up as a moral bastion of goodness, an otherwise dark and bleak existence, right? And if you're doing stuff like this, as your caller rightly said there, the Cliff Richard issue as well, it's, again, take your pick, frankly, with the BBC.
Savile alone, you know.
That's as bad as it gets.
At least Murdoch, who came to own the news of the world, at least he closed it down in disgrace. But the BBC intends to sail on regardless.
Yes, exactly. And they're very good at lecturing us. Now, I think this shows, again, how out of touch they are with the common person. They got it badly wrong over Brexit, continue to get it wrong over Brexit. When you need someone on every single BBC show who's a monitor for unconscious bias, that's your problem, not mine, right? That implies that there's an institutional issue with there. What are you guarding against, right? And this is the problem with the BBC. Now, I don't think they understand the really sour taste in the public mouth that has been left, specifically now over this Diana issue. And the way they've gone about this whole report, you know, essentially trying to cover it up, rehiring the bloke, that speaks volumes to me. Now, I think the BBC was already on a knife edge anyway. We are now starting to question, I think. We're not blindly going along with the Beeb anymore. We're saying, what are we paying for? And what are we getting in a world of massive commercial choice?
Now, the COVID, just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, the COVID history is dividing the government. You've got Dominic Cummings coming up this week, directly accusing Boris Johnson of things which Boris Johnson directly denies. That's a collision course worth watching, isn't it?
Get your popcorn out on Wednesday. Dominic Cummings is going to have a pop. And it's frankly what you kind of love to see it, really, from a kind of Machiavellian sense, and bear-pin, old gladiatorial sense. What I think would say with Dominic Cummings is he said a couple of things. He said about the fact that that Boris got it wrong over lockdown. But the key point that he said to me that really undermined, I think, what we might be about to hear from him is his point was, if there were more competent people in government, we would have avoided all lockdowns. Now, when you look around the world, everywhere, really, or especially in Europe, really, went into lockdown. So a complete smorgasbord of different politicians with different ideologies. So the very notion that just by having a better quality of individual at the top would have avoided all lockdowns, I think he's starting to look a little bit Captain Hindsight in that regard. What I will say as well is a man who so freely had no qualms whatsoever about sitting in the Rose Garden and telling an absolute whopper about Barnard Castle. You have to take some of the things he says with a pinch of salt. But I think there's definitely more.
And the liberal media are in a jam because they told us that Dominic Cummings was a liar.
Yeah.
But now he's telling the truth because he's attacking Boris Johnson.
Yeah, this is it. Now, look, I think Boris possibly has something to be concerned about. If Dominic Cummings has audio recordings of Boris behind closed doors, which I imagine is quite fruity, then that could be bad for our Prime Minister.
Would that be legal?
To
illegally record the Prime Minister when you were a signatory, presumably the Official Secrets Act, and so on?
That's the question, isn't it? But then I suppose, does that happen when you're under oath, if he's under oath in this inquiry? I'm not sure. Look, I'm not... I think that's the big question. Does he have them, right? Does he have them? We will find out. If he does, I would imagine they would do everything within their power to make sure they're all redacted and never see the light of day. But also, I think with Dominic Cummings, look, he's obviously a very unique individual. I think, you know, I hesitate to say, a lot of people throw it out there, Dominic Cummings, he's almost too intelligent for his own good. I'm not sure that's true. I think he's a bit wacky, and there is a place for people like that in society, don't get me wrong, and he's done some out-of-the-box things. That's what's made him who he is. How trustworthy he is another question entirely. What I will say about this issue, though, is that clearly, everyone around Boris Johnson was pro-lockdown for full time, wanted lockdown so this was over. And actually, I think Boris might emerge better out of all this, because it looks to me like Boris might have been the only person, a field full of lockdown fanatics, who actually said, you know what, I don't really like this. And he might emerge quite well out of it, or you know, ultimately the other side, he might end his career.
No, I know you're a big Eurovision Song Contest man.
Yeah.
Were you shaken to your core when Britain got 0 points last night?
You know, I mean, those Europeans, they don't know they're born, do they? People, the fields of Europe are awash with the blood of English men who fought and died for Moldova's right to give us 0 points. You know, I think, you know, it's relentless. They don't know how good they've got it, you know. But, no, I think, I mean, it's a shocker, isn't it, really? The fact is, we contribute, right, it's classic Britain, this, we contribute more to Eurovision's budget than any other nation, and we provide the biggest television audience. And we take a kicking every single time. It's the 5th time that we've got 0 points, for goodness sake.
Wow.
You know.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
What am I looking at? Tell me what I'm looking at. There they are.
Oh, here we are.
I love that. For Moldova to have the right to give us 0 points, British blood was shed on the battlefields of Europe. You heard, Patrick, we are paying more than anybody else to this Eurovision, and we are providing the biggest television audience for this. What is this, masochism?
Yeah.
Is it an S&M show? We're paying and providing the audience for them to ritually humiliate us.
It is, and the fact is, it's a brave individual that goes on Eurovision anyway, because we're going to take a kicking. So, I mean, it is a brave person. I don't understand why they do. I turned it on for a bit and was immediately confronted by a bleached blonde German wearing a pink jacket playing a Diamante-encrusted ukulele, and I had enough immediately.
But it is bizarre, Patrick. We are the kings of popular music.
Yeah.
Do I have to mention them?
Yeah.
The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Adele. We sell more records than any other country in the world other than the United States. And we do quite well there.
Yeah.
Nobody buys Moldovan popular music. Nobody's ever bought a Belgian album. Even Kraftwerk are a joke. And they're humiliating us in the Eurovision Song Contest. I find it quite hard to take.
I do find... I actually think... I found myself getting really irrationally angry about the whole thing. As you can probably tell, I'm still fuming about it. I'm not over it, right? This lot, they don't know they're born, you know. I think it's probably time we withdrew funding. We voted to leave this nonsense. Let's get out of the Eurovision Song Contest.
That was my last point to you, that we Brexited.
Yeah.
Let's Brexit from this Eurovision annual ritual humiliation of Britain. That's my next campaign. I can feel it coming on. Is Norma on the line, did I hear? We do... Ozzy Osbourne, by the way, has won our poll. 58% of people think that we should put forward Ozzy Osbourne.
Why not?
Well, you'll need to tell me who he is first.
You need to tell him who he is, actually, I think, by the sounds of things. But the thing is, someone said to me...
We need to tell Ozzy who he is.
Someone said to me, they're only doing this because of Brexit. The fact is, they were giving us nil point before Brexit anyway, so it didn't really matter,
Well, that's right. Have you said we've had 0.5 times?
5 times, yeah.
That must predate Brexit.
It's always happened. We've got Gemini, we had the dizzying heights of Gemini. The issue is, though, George, it used to be...
I'm old enough to remember Sandy Shaw winning it. Lulu won it, I think.
But we don't make him like that anymore, do we?
They don't make them like that anymore. There's a legend on the line, Patrick, and everything traditionally gets cleared as soon as the legend, that is Norma in Bristol, appears on the line, and she is here. Norma, did you watch the Eurovision?
Nah.
That's that Fox shot. What do you want to talk about?
Actually, no, I'm just... it's coffee time after the main meal with me, George.
I know, darling. Tell me.
No, it's just that, it's finished this... Well, this lockdown is... We're able to go out now. And my family took us to a little coast place, Clevedon. It's nearby, for a lovely family meal yesterday.
Good.
And one of my granddaughters gave me Series 3 of The Crown. Now, I know you've watched this, haven't you?
I have. I like The Crown, actually.
Yeah, well, it was Series 3, so we've only...
It was kind of like the history of my lifetime. Because I was I was born 54,
Yeah.
she was crowned 53. So I kind of... it was like a soundtrack for me.
Well, it goes back, didn't it, with the funeral of Churchill and Wilson and...
Yeah.
But we've got some more to see. The other thing just I did want to say was...
Is there a new season? There's a new season of The Crown, is there?
Oh, is there?
Patrick?
Probably. No.
I think so.
The royal still exists.
I don't know. I don't think it's immediate, but I don't think they've stopped it. Even though the royals wanted them to stop it.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Go on.
That's all right. That was just Series 3. She cost £25, actually, in the supermarket. But anyway...
Oh, was it? I see. It was a DVD. I got it on Netflix. See? I got it on Netflix.
No, I haven't got Netflix.
Oh.
Anyway, this particular granddaughter, I do want to mention her because she's worked so hard and she's just qualified and got a degree as a nurse.
Very good.
At this particular time, it's been very hard for her and she loves the job. So, great girl she is.
Terrific.
I'm very proud of her.
Terrific. Well done. And you got a special meal. So, how's everyone in the house? Is your husband well?
He's all right. We're really pretty decrepit. We are, honestly, George. But it's nice to have been taken out because we haven't been out for ages.
No, being in a restaurant, Patrick, is quite, well, it's almost discombobulating. You almost feel as if, should I be here? Am I allowed to be here?
Yeah.
Have you been out?
Yeah, I have. I've been
allowed?
out, George. Yes, no, I have. Yes, I've ventured out into the wild, and it is. You're right. It's actually quite weird in a way. I went out a few weeks back before we were actually allowed in places. They've pedestrianised Soho, right? And it was the first time I'd been out for a meal in
It's like a VE Day street party, yeah.
Gosh, it was absolutely magnificent. And you know what? Literally just this. I didn't even like the meal. And it didn't matter. I was out, everyone was around, and it was just a wonderful thing. And you know what? I will never take for granted again, actually, just human contact. Just the notion of just seeing people and seeing life happening. I will never take that for granted again. And I'm not glad that the coronavirus thing happened. I'm not glad about all of it. But if there's one thing to come out of it, I think it has kind of reinvigorated me just about the little things that I took for granted that I will never take for granted again. Basic human contact, basic freedoms, which I think we need to get a lot more of back, by the way, but basic freedoms, things that I used to just take for granted that now actually I will never take for granted again.
Fantastic to see you again. We didn't get deeply into the papers, but I think we covered the main issues. So thanks very much. Look forward to doing that again with you next week. You've been a marvellous audience. I hope you've enjoyed watching and listening as much as I have enjoyed presenting. We have toured the horizon from the great issues of war and peace right down to Norma's family dinner, which made us all feel, I think, a bit warmer because Norma is, in a way, she's a weather vane. If she can go out and be happy, then all of us can be. God bless you, Norma. God bless all of you who've watched and listened tonight. If you enjoyed it, come back next week at the same time in the same place. Why don't you? It's the mother of all talk shows.